Hi everyone, welcome to Paranormal M. In tonight's video, we'll go through several paranormal stories, starting with one that's a little hard to explain. Before we get into it, if you enjoy the video, please give it a like. And if you've had any strange or unexplained experiences, you can send them to me. This first story is about someone who grew up having nightmares that felt unusually real, and later lived in a house where strange sounds, marks, and feelings made them question what was really going on. So get comfortable, and I hope you sleep well tonight. I've had nightmares for as long as I can remember. Not just the occasional bad dream either. Since I was little, it's felt like the nightmares came more often than anything peaceful. The first one I still remember clearly happened when I was maybe 4 or 5. In the dream, my mother was taken from me by something I couldn't really explain. It wasn't a person exactly, more like a presence, an entity. And even though I was so young, that dream stayed with me. As I got older, the nightmares kept coming. But some of them didn't feel like normal dreams. Some felt almost like I was watching something that had already happened somewhere else, in another time, another country, maybe even another version of reality. I know that sounds strange. I know how it sounds when I say it out loud. But the people in those dreams never felt like characters my mind had invented. They felt real. There was something in their faces, especially their eyes, that made them feel separate from me, like they had their own lives, their own pain, their own history. One dream, for example, felt like it took place sometime in the 1800s, during British rule in what seemed to be Malaysia. At the time, I didn't even know much about that history, which made it feel even stranger when I woke up. In the dream, I was watching a young woman named Amara. I wasn't exactly her, but I could feel what she felt. It was like I was both outside of her and inside her at the same time. She lived with a cruel father who hurt her, and eventually she ran away deep into the forest. Over time, she became feared by the people around her, almost like they believed she had turned into a witch. Later, when her father found her and tried to hurt her again, she killed him. The dream ended with her living alone in a small shelter near the trees, while his body was left behind inside, slowly decomposing. I woke up carrying her grief and fear in my chest. It didn't fade right away. Sometimes after dreams like that, I cry for hours. Sometimes the feeling follows me for the whole day. I've had other dreams like that too, set in different places and different periods of history. I don't always understand them, but they feel heavy, too detailed, too emotional. Like I've accidentally opened a door into someone else's sorrow. Then there was the house I used to live in. For context, I lived in India for a while, in a house surrounded mostly by fields. There weren't really neighbors close by, so when I heard things, there was no easy explanation for them. That house had this smell sometimes, a strong, rotten smell, like decay or something dead, and it would appear randomly. My room always made me feel afraid. Not uncomfortable, not just nervous, but deeply scared, like my body knew something my mind was trying not to admit. Sometimes I would sit there and feel, with complete certainty, that something was in the room with me. There were handprints too. That still bothers me when I think about it. I found them on the bathroom ceiling, way too high for me to reach. I found more near the top of my window, again in places I physically couldn't touch. And most mornings, I would wake up with scratches on my body. That stopped after I moved out. I also heard footsteps, sometimes shouting, sometimes voices, but again, the house was isolated. There wasn't anyone nearby who could have explained it. And during the time we lived there, my family life got worse too. Everything felt heavier, angrier, more unstable. I don't know how else to describe it except that the house felt like it was pressing down on all of us. Living there made me feel like I was slowly losing my mind. A couple of years after I moved out, I finally let myself think the thing I had been avoiding. I thought, maybe something really was there. And the strange thing is, admitting that didn't make me more afraid. It actually made me feel calm, relieved almost, like some part of me had been waiting for permission to believe my own experience. That night, when I tried to sleep, my body became incredibly relaxed, almost too relaxed. I could still move, but I could barely feel myself. I remember wondering if my heart was even beating properly. Then I started to feel hot, and it felt like I was floating upward from the bed. But every time I felt myself rising, this heavy pressure came down on my chest and shoulders, forcing me back. It happened again and again through the night. I thought maybe it was sleep paralysis, but it didn't feel like the sleep paralysis I'd had before. I could move my arms, my legs, my eyes, my whole body. I wasn't frozen, but something still felt like it was pushing me down. At the time, I was terrified. A few days later, I had another dream. I was floating somewhere that looked like the ocean and outer space had somehow become the same place. There were stars everywhere and fish moving around me as if they belonged there. Nearby, there was a tunnel. I knew immediately that I shouldn't go into it. Then I had this feeling that my little brother had gone inside and that I needed to go after him. I was about to enter when a man appeared. I don't know who he was, but his presence was peaceful, protective. He told me not to go, and I listened. When I woke up, I kept thinking about that pressure from the night before. At first, I had thought it was something bad, something trying to hurt me. But after that dream, I wondered if maybe it had been stopping me from going somewhere I wasn't supposed to go. I'm not saying I know what any of this means. I really don't. Maybe there are explanations I haven't found yet. Maybe some things are just strange and hard to place. But I needed to put this into words. I needed to say it somewhere and ask if anyone else has ever experienced anything even remotely similar. Hey, I want to share something that's been happening around my house for a while now. Something that really freaked me out just tonight. I've been meaning to talk about it for quite some time, but this latest encounter pushed me to finally say something. Fair warning, some parts might sound a bit scattered because my adrenaline's still racing, and I'm honestly still shaken up. So, for the past few months, there's been this weird presence lurking near my home. The first time I noticed something odd was one night when I was down in the basement. Outside the window there's a porch, and the porch light is controlled by a switch right by the door. I went upstairs for a bit and later remembered I left those lights on, so I came back down to switch them off. But when I got there, the porch lights were already on. Now, my dad had been trying for ages to install a timer for those lights, but gave up weeks ago and just put in a regular switch instead. So I assumed he must have finally figured out the timer, but turns out, no timer was working at all. The next morning, the lights were still on. I went to turn them off and realized it was a simple switch, meaning someone had flipped it on during the night. This freaked me out because everyone else in the house was asleep, and I have a deep fear of being watched. The idea that someone could have been out there, maybe even watching me, was terrifying. A few weeks later, I was alone in the living room late at night with my dogs. One of them, my older chocolate lab, is usually pretty anxious, but the other, a mix of German Shepherd and Beagle I call my Puggle, is typically calm and relaxed. Suddenly, the Puggle perked up and stared at the window. I looked too and saw something white, hunched over, dropping down over our fence and running past the windows. The glare and dirt on the window made it impossible to tell what it was or how big, but I yelped in panic and called my friends. They thought it was probably just a raccoon, and honestly, I convinced myself of that too. I went outside with my dogs to check things out. The lab was anxious, pacing and sniffing around nervously, but the puggle was wagging her tail and staring intently at the trees, like she was expecting a treat or something. Then, out of nowhere, the trees groaned loudly. These are big old trees that don't just creak for no reason. We had a mountain lion around here last year, so I know what their sounds usually mean. I shined my flashlight up the trees but saw nothing. Still, my dog's behavior and the strange noises kept me on edge all night. There were knocks on the roof, pebbles hitting the window, and even the sound of a woodpecker, which was odd since my cats had taken down the last one months ago. But the scariest part happened just tonight. I was in the basement with my sister, FaceTiming a friend, when suddenly we heard this blood-curdling screech outside. My first thought was that the cats were fighting with raccoons again. They're notorious for that. But this screech sounded different, more chilling. I ran to the window to see what was going on, and what I saw stopped me cold. Standing outside was a tall, gaunt, pale humanoid figure, easily taller than me. I'm 6 feet, so yeah, it was pretty tall. It had its back turned to the window, and the moment I looked away and back again, it was gone. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, or maybe the snow on the ground was making things look weird. But I was shaking, terrified. I told my sister, who just laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Later that night, when I went upstairs to lock up, I saw my cat perched on the garage roof, looking calm but alert. Then I saw it again, the same pale figure, this time squatting and watching my cat. It didn't seem aggressive, but then it suddenly twisted its body in this weird, almost unnatural way, kind of like a meerkat standing up, but much more eerie. I swear I heard something like bones cracking. I never saw its face. As soon as it turned, my fight or flight kicked in, and I ran to my room, slamming the door behind me. The last thing I saw was it leaping onto the porch railing, then disappearing toward the nearby trees. I don't know what this thing is or what it wants, but it's been haunting me for months now. I just hope sharing this helps me make sense of it, or at least helps me feel a little less alone in this. Thanks for listening. I still think about that night sometimes, because nothing about it felt important at first. It was just a normal Saturday evening, the kind where you go out to eat with your family, talk about nothing in particular, laugh a little too loudly, and then forget most of it by the next morning. We had dinner at this small restaurant near our neighborhood. It was cozy inside, warm and noisy in that comfortable way restaurants get when every table has its own little world happening. After we finished eating, we paid the bill and stepped outside. The air had turned cool, and the parking lot was glowing under those yellowish lights that make everything feel a little softer than it really is. As we were walking toward our car, we ran into a group of people near the entrance, and right away, I recognized 2 of them. They were my volleyball teammates, Leah and Lena. They're sisters, and they were there with their family. Their mom was there, their uncle was there, and a few other relatives were standing around too. The second our parents noticed each other, that was it. They started talking like they had planned the whole thing, laughing, asking questions, catching up, doing that loud parent conversation where everyone somehow talks at the same time and still understands each other. I went straight over to Leah and Lena. We started joking about practice, talking about our last game, and laughing about some drama on the team. It felt completely normal. But while we were talking, I noticed a man standing a little behind them. He was tall, bald, and wearing a simple dark jacket. I didn't recognize him at all. He wasn't joining the conversation, but he wasn't acting distant either. He just stood there quietly, smiling. And it was the strangest smile. Not creepy, not uncomfortable, just gentle, but confused. Like he was happy to be there, even though part of him didn't fully understand why he was there. His eyes moved from the girls to their family, then over to our parents, then back again. He looked peaceful, almost proud, but there was something far away about him too. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured he was probably a cousin, or an old family friend, or maybe someone from their neighborhood who had come with them. You know how family gatherings are. There's always someone you don't know standing around. So I let it go. After a few minutes, we all said goodbye. Leah and Lena waved at me. Our parents finished their final round of, "Okay, we really have to go now," and we drove home. Later that night, I was in bed with the lights off, just scrolling on my phone. My room was quiet, and my screen was the only thing lighting up the walls. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just doing that half-asleep scrolling where your brain is already halfway gone. Then a video came up on my feed. It was from Lena. I almost smiled because I thought it would be something funny, maybe a volleyball clip or some random trend. But the music was slow, soft, sad. Then I started reading the words on the screen. She was posting about her father. She wrote that it had been 4 years since he passed away, and she was talking about how much she missed him, how much she wished he could still see her and her sister growing up, how she hoped he was proud of them. And then a photo appeared. It was an old picture of her dad. I swear, my whole body went cold. I stopped breathing for a second. My hand froze over my phone and I just stared at the screen in the dark. Because the man in that photo was him. The same tall, bald man from the restaurant. The same face. The same build. The same calm expression. The same quiet smile. The man I had seen standing beside Leah and Lena only a few hours earlier was their father. Their father who had been gone for 4 years. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just kept replaying the video over and over, trying to convince myself I was mistaken. But I wasn't. And the part I can never forget is how he looked at them that night. He didn't seem lost anymore when I thought back on it. He seemed like someone who had come just close enough to see his daughter smiling, to stand with his family for a few quiet minutes under the parking lot lights, and then disappear before anyone realized what had happened. I need to tell you about Damien. For a long time, the only thing Damien remembered clearly from the night his little girl died was the smell of scorched tires and the bright, terrible crack of glass breaking around him. Everything after that came in pieces. Not the sirens, not the hospital lights, not the officer standing beside him with that careful voice telling him his daughter was gone before the ambulance ever got there. What he did remember was this. He survived. Not just survived, really. He walked away without a mark on him. No broken bones, no blood, nothing. Mira was 8 years old, tiny for her age, and somehow, in that violent second, she took the force that should have hit him. People at grief counseling told him survivor's guilt was normal. They told him shame had a way of loosening its grip with time. They told him he was among people who understood loss, and they were right. They just weren't telling him everything. Damien found the flyer tucked beneath his windshield wiper outside the hospital. He still went there once a month, even 3 years later. He would sit in the parking lot and stare at the entrance doors, the same doors they had rushed Mira through and never brought her back out of. The flyer said, "Grief Support Circle, every Thursday at 7 p.m., St. Celia Community Hall. You do not have to carry this alone." He almost threw it away. He had tried therapy before, twice, maybe 3 times depending on how you counted the sessions where he sat in silence and stared at the floor. He didn't want someone gently asking him to imagine Mira somewhere peaceful. Peace felt insulting. What he wanted was to sit in a room where people understood that some losses do not soften. They settle into you like stone. Eventually, you stop being someone who lost a person. You become someone built around the empty space they left behind. So, one cold Thursday evening in November, Damien went. There were 6 people in the room. Martin, a steady man in his 50s, said he had lost his son to a drunk driver. Petra, quiet and small, had lost her husband in a roadside accident. Lucas, only 24, had lost his mother and younger sister on the highway. There was also Diane, who had lost her father, and Calvin, who had lost his nephew. And then there was Damien. Nobody smothered him with sympathy. Nobody leaned too hard into kindness. Martin poured him bad coffee in a paper cup and said, "You don't have to speak tonight. Most people don't, at first." So Damien sat and listened. For the first time in years, grief in a room felt real to him. Not polished, not managed, not nudged toward healing. Just there. Heavy. Breathing. He came back the next Thursday, and the next. By winter, he was talking. By early spring, he even laughed once at something Calvin said, and the sound startled him so much he covered his mouth. Petra reached over and touched his sleeve. "It's allowed," she whispered. And somehow, that broke something open in him. The group became the frame holding his week together. He slept a little more. He cooked actual meals. He called his sister after more than a year of ignoring her messages. His therapist told him, "Whatever that circle is doing for you, keep going." So he did. And at first, he didn't notice the strange little things. He didn't notice how often the questions returned to the accident. How fast had he been driving? Had anyone tested his blood? Had there been charges? Had the families ever reached out? He told himself people in grief needed details, needed to measure one pain against another. He didn't notice the way Martin watched him when he thought Damien wasn't looking. He didn't notice that no new members ever came. He didn't notice that none of them had ever said how they found the group. Then one evening, Damien arrived early. He had forgotten his coat the week before, and when the custodian let him inside, the hallway was dim and quiet. The meeting room door was almost closed. He reached for it. And then he heard Martin say his name. Damien still doesn't know the whole story. Damien froze. Diane said, "He's ready." Then Petra, calm as ever, said, "He needs to hear all of it. Not fragments, not hints. He needs to understand what he caused." Damien's hand stayed flat against the door. Then Lucas spoke. The blood report was buried. His lawyer kept it out before the hearing even started. Point 13. We have the original copy. Damien stood there, barely breathing. Calvin said, "They ruled it single vehicle. He was never charged. He walked away from everything." Then Martin said, quieter now, "He has sat with us for months, talking about his daughter, as if she was simply taken from him, as if he had no hand in any of it." Damien pushed the door open. All 6 of them turned. Nobody looked shocked. That was the worst part. They looked like people who had been waiting for him to arrive at this exact moment. Damien said, "How long have you known?" Martin looked straight at him. "Before you ever walked into this room." And then Damien understood. The flyer on his windshield, the hospital parking lot, the invitation that had felt accidental. "You put it on my car," he said. Petra nodded. "We needed you to come here by choice. We needed you to feel safe enough to talk." Damien leaned against the wall because his legs were no longer reliable things. "Your son," he said to Martin. "The drunk driver who killed him." Martin's face did not change. "That was you." No shouting, no trembling, just the truth laid on the floor between them. His name was Connor, Martin said. He was 19. He had a scholarship. He was leaving for college in less than a month. You don't remember him because you didn't stop. Damien turned to Petra. She answered before he asked. My husband saw Connor in the road. He pulled over to help. Another car came around the bend and hit him. He died before they reached the hospital. Her voice stayed steady, but it cut deeper because of that. You didn't only kill one person that night. You started a chain. You just left before you had to see it. Damien looked from face to face. Lucas, Diane, Calvin. He understood then. Every loss in that room was tied to the same road, the same night, the same decision. His decision. Lucas reached beneath his chair and placed a small black recorder on the floor. A red light blinked. Every meeting has been recorded, Lucas said. Every Thursday. Your version of that night. Your admission that you had been drinking. Your memory of the crash. Your choice to leave. Damien stared at the recorder. Lucas continued. Tomorrow the recordings go to journalists, attorneys, and every family connected to this room. Diane spoke gently then. We are not going to hurt you. That was never why we brought you here. Martin leaned forward, his hands folded. The law gave us nothing, he said. So we made something it couldn't erase. The truth. In your voice. With witnesses. Damien sank to the floor. He did not mean to sit. His body simply gave up pretending it could hold him. For years he had carried grief. But that night, in St. Celia Community Hall, surrounded by the people whose lives had splintered outward from his own choices, he finally felt something heavier than grief. Responsibility. The recorder kept blinking in the silence. Steady, patient, unforgiving. You know, back in my hometown, somewhere in the heart of the Midwest, there's this little gas station that's right on a pretty busy road. It's smack dab in the middle of town, just a short walk from the local airstrip. On the other side of that street, there's a hotel. It's changed owners more times than I can count, but honestly, it's had a pretty dull history since it was built. What really caught my attention is the big field right next to that hotel. It's a wide open space, with tall grass that sways high enough to hide most things. Since the hotel was built, folks staying in rooms on the side closest to the field have been telling stories. Strange noises, like scratching on window panes, or sudden gasps coming from outside. And the weirdest part? People have claimed to see apparitions out in that field. Now, I'd never heard any of this until recently, so it all felt like a local legend to me at first. My first real encounter happened at the new Casey's General Store, the gas station right across from the field. It's a spot I stop by often on my way to work, so I've seen plenty of odd things over time. The first time I noticed something unusual, I saw what looked like a short, stocky man standing about 50 feet into the field, his shoulders just poking above the tall grass. But when I looked right at him, he just disappeared. So I figured maybe it was just a kid playing a trick or something. Then, another time, I spotted 3 figures: a woman in an old-fashioned dress, a man wearing a ball cap, and another man dressed in what looked like a uniform. But again, as I waited for my gas to fill, they vanished. When I looked up from the pump, there was this guy across from me staring confused at the field. I couldn't resist saying the creepiest thing I could think of. They don't like it when you look right at them. He looked over at me, clearly startled. like he hadn't even noticed I was there. Turns out, he worked at the hotel, a security guard, and had seen these figures many times but never got a good look. He told me about complaints from guests who swore someone was peeking through their windows, but whenever he checked, there was no sign of anyone, no footprints, nothing. He said he'd started to notice these figures just out of the corner of his eye. We chatted a bit, trying to dig up any history about the field or the hotel, but neither of us could find anything. City records showed the field had never been developed, and before the hotel was there, it was just empty land for at least 70 years. Weird, right? Lately, I've started to think whatever's out there might be creeping closer to the gas station. I was talking to one of the attendants I'm friendly with, and she said she's caught glimpses of people standing near the pumps, always just out of direct sight. Then, just today, I pulled up and noticed a workman's truck parked oddly away from the pumps. From the driver's seat, I could see someone inside, but I didn't look straight at them. They seemed to be watching me, but it didn't really register. When I stepped outside, I found a police officer standing nearby, writing something down. I was worried the guy in the truck was going to get a ticket for parking there because, well, cops around here are quick to write them. I told the officer, "Hey, the owner just walked inside and it's legal to park here." But the cop looked at me like I was nuts. "You said the owner is here?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, why?" He pointed to a strange red stain on the wet concrete nearby. The driver was in a hit-and-run accident. He died at the hospital last night. That's when it hit me. Whatever this is, it's not just about the field. It's something else entirely. I remember how the figure in the truck was sitting, fully facing the window and turning his whole body as he watched me. The cop ended up trying to find a way into the truck but found nothing. The keys were locked inside, and they had to call a tow truck. So yeah, whether it's connected to the field or not, there's definitely something strange going on out here. And I'm just trying to keep my eyes open, even if they don't like it when I look right at them. I still think about this sometimes, even though it happened about 5 years ago. It was not long after my granddad passed away from COVID, and I guess I should say first that he and I were really close. He was one of the only people in my life I felt completely safe around. He had this very calm, spiritual side to him. He practiced Reiki, meditated a lot, and whenever he saw me, he would always rest his hand gently on my head for a moment. I never really asked him why. That was just something he did. When he died, it broke something in me. I carried this horrible guilt because I believed he might have caught COVID from me. At the time, when he was in the hospital, I kept telling myself he would get better. I did not call him as much as I should have. I did not understand that I was running out of time. Then, just like that, he was gone. Because it happened during COVID, we did not get a proper funeral. On the day he was buried, some of my family watched through a video call because most of us could not be there in person. I did not even know the call was happening at first. I had only walked out to get a glass of water, and then I noticed the screen. And that was when I saw him. I saw my granddad being buried, wrapped in a dark body bag. I do not know how to explain what that did to me. He had always been such a respected, gentle, almost glowing person in my mind. Seeing him like that felt painfully wrong. Even now, years later, that image still comes back to me. I looked through some of my old diary entries later, and apparently it took almost a month before I really started grieving. Before that, I was just numb. Like my mind had wrapped itself in cotton and refused to feel anything properly. After he passed, I started spending most of my time in his room. Some of the furniture had been moved around, and the room did not look exactly the same anymore, but I kept a lot of my things there. Sometimes I slept there too. For a while, our house helper slept in the room as well, on a mattress on the floor. I slept on my granddad's bed near the window. During that time, I would wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I could not breathe. I would be shaking and crying, and the only thought in my head was that my granddad was disappointed in me. It was not even normal grief at first. It was not memories of him or missing his voice. It was just this crushing feeling that I had failed him somehow. The thought would get so loud that I could not think around it. I do not remember every detail clearly anymore, but I remember feeling so weak and panicked that sometimes I would crawl to my parents' room because standing up felt impossible. I would sit there crying until the feeling finally passed. After a while, the helper stopped sleeping in that room, and my parents let me stay there alone because their room was right beside mine. Then one morning, something happened that I still cannot explain. I woke up at around 5 in the morning. That was strange by itself because I never woke up that early. It was still dark outside, that bluish kind of dark before sunrise. Normally, I would never look out the window at that hour. I was always scared I might see something. But for some reason, I got up and opened the curtain. The window faced the front gate of our house, and standing right in front of the gate was someone. At least, I think it was someone. I could not tell if it was a man or a woman. They were completely still. What I remember most was the white top they were wearing. It looked so bright against the dark, brighter than it should have looked. Their hair seemed thick and black, maybe not very long. I just stood there staring. I do not know how long I looked. It might have only been a few seconds, but it felt stretched out, like the whole world had gone quiet. The figure was not walking. It was not looking around. It was just standing there in front of the gate, perfectly still. Then it suddenly hit me that what I was seeing was not normal. I ran to get my mom. The whole thing probably took less than half a minute. But when we came back, there was nobody there. No one at the gate, no sound, nothing. I have never been able to explain it. Part of me thinks it was grief, trauma, lack of sleep, or maybe I was still half dreaming. Maybe my mind was trying to make shape out of darkness. But another part of me still wonders if I really saw something. Years later, I told someone about it, and they said that because my granddad had been so spiritual and meditated so often, maybe it was him. Or maybe it was some kind of gentle presence watching over the house. I honestly do not know what I believe. I am not trying to force one explanation over the other. I am not even sure what answer I want. I just know that this memory has stayed with me for 5 years, and I have never fully let it go. So I guess I am sharing it because I want to know whether anyone else has experienced something like this after losing someone close. And maybe, somewhere deep down, I still want to understand what I saw that morning. Hey, I want to share a story with you that stuck with me for a long time. It's about my childhood, a time that was both frightening and strangely protective, and it all started in a house that held more than just memories. When I was just a little girl, around 6 years old, I lived with my parents in a small, worn-down home. It wasn't the kind of place where you felt safe all the time. My dad wasn't kind. In fact, he was often the source of my fear. But my mom, she was my shield. One night, things got really bad. I remember my mom telling me to hide in the closet, to be quiet and stay put. I was scared stiff, tears silently streaming down my face, frozen by the sounds of my dad stumbling through the house. I heard the crash of the car door, the angry shouting, and then the dreadful footsteps slowly climbing the stairs. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. I was ready to face whatever was coming, ready to take whatever punishment was meant for me or my mom. But then, something changed. I heard a loud thud, and suddenly, my mom appeared in the hallway, calm and strong, with my dad lying still behind her. She looked at me, eyes full of love and relief, and whispered, "Sweetheart, I found a safe place for us. He's never going to hurt you again." That moment was the turning point. It was like the darkness that had loomed over us was lifted, replaced by a new kind of safety. My mom's strength saved us, and from that night on, I felt protected in a way I never had before. Years later, I moved to an old house that once belonged to my grandparents. It's a place filled with echoes, mist that drifts mysteriously by the window, doors that open and close on their own, footsteps that seem to follow me in the attic. My husband hears them too, those heavy steps that make us pause and wonder if we're truly alone. Sometimes at night, we hear knocking on the windows or strange sounds from the kitchen and the spare room. Once, the handle of an old truck rattled outside, making us jump, only for us to find no one there. It's unsettling, sure, but it's also a reminder that some places carry the weight of those who lived before us. Then there was the time, when I was a kid, I saw something I can't forget. A shadow that wasn't just a trick of the light, but a dark, solid figure that moved in ways no human could. It would vanish and reappear, inching closer until I was too scared to keep watching. I ran to my parents crying and shaking, and they comforted me with prayers and a crucifix under my pillow. Even now, I wonder what that shadow was and why it chose to visit me. One afternoon, while mountain biking with my best friend, we saw an old man appear out of nowhere on the trail. He wore clothes too heavy for the warm day and carried a stick. He greeted us, but vanished so quickly it was like he was never there. We still call him the ghost on the trail, a mysterious figure that reminds us the world holds more than what meets the eye. And once, in the quiet of my home, I saw a small figure enter the bathroom, a little girl, smiling but not speaking. She stayed for a moment before fading away like smoke. I was frozen with fear but also curiosity. Sometimes the unexplained visits us in the most unexpected ways. There was also a night when I dared to open my eyes during prayer. Instead of peace, I saw a figure so haunting, so filled with suffering, it broke me. It was like looking at pain made flesh, bloodied, crowned with thorns, and yet somehow demanding my attention. It disappeared with the final word of the prayer, but the fear stayed with me long after. My neighbor's house, after she passed, became a place of strange happenings too. My siblings and I tried to capture proof of the paranormal, but our footage vanished, and the house itself seemed to resist our presence. When our parents checked, they found the place trashed, as if something had been disturbed. And living in the desert, I've seen things that defy explanation. Glowing lights that dance beyond the horizon, voices muffled beneath the earth, and figures that move in ways no human should. Friends have shared stories of hiding, being watched by mysterious vans, and encountering beings that belong to another world. Through all these experiences, one thing remains clear. There's more to life than what we see. Sometimes, darkness visits us not to harm, but to teach us about courage, about protection, and about the mysteries that weave through our lives. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings you a sense of wonder and reminds you that even in the darkest moments, there can be a light, sometimes from the most unexpected places. I grew up in the West Midlands, in the UK, in a little terraced house that never really felt like it belonged only to us. It was just me and my mum back then. She was raising me on her own, and when we moved into that place, I was still young enough to think adults had an explanation for everything. But in that house, even my mum didn't have answers. For years, I thought maybe I'd imagined some of it. You tell yourself that when you get older, don't you? That maybe childhood fear made things bigger than they were. But recently, I found out the house had been built near an old burial ground, close to a former sanatorium that had once cared for children. And honestly, when I learned that, so much of what happened there suddenly felt heavier. I'll start with what I remember seeing myself. There was a cupboard under the stairs where my toys were kept. Most children would have been straight in there, dragging everything out. Not me. I hated that cupboard. I mean, really hated it. I used to see a child in there. They were always tucked away in the shadows, turned slightly from me, never looking directly at my face. I can't remember what they looked like clearly. I don't remember their eyes or their expression. Just the shape of them, small and still, hiding among my things like they had every right to be there. I was terrified of getting my toys out. I'd beg my mom to do it for me, but even she never seemed comfortable opening that cupboard. She'd try to act calm, because that's what moms do, but I could feel her hesitation. Then there were the scratching noises. Not little mouse sounds, not pipes. It sounded like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor, except it moved through the walls and across the ceiling. It would travel around the room, slow and deliberate, as if something was circling us from inside the house itself. There wasn't any crawl space there, no gap where a person or animal could have been moving, but the sound was real. At night, I used to feel watched. I know people say that a lot when they're frightened, but this was different. It wasn't just a feeling from the dark. It felt crowded, like there were people standing around my bed, staring down at me while I tried to sleep. I'd pull the covers up and stay as still as I could, hoping whatever was there would lose interest. The thing that scared me most happened more than once. I would be standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up, and two adult heads would appear around the corner at the top. They weren't clear faces. They were dark and misty, almost like smoke trying to pretend it was human. And they would call me. Not loudly, not angrily, just softly, like they wanted me to come upstairs, like they wanted me away from everyone else. Even as a child, I knew not to go. My family saw things too. It wasn't just me. Relatives would visit or stay over with my mom, and almost everyone who spent time in that house came away unsettled. One person saw figures crawling out of the wardrobe. My mom's friend once saw a man and a woman watching her. She said the man felt furious, full of rage, and the woman beside him looked distressed, as though she was trying to claw or pull at the skin on her own face. There were decorations hanging from the ceiling that would suddenly start spinning on their own. Not swaying a little, not moving because of a draft. Spinning hard, completely out of control, and then stopping the moment someone told them to stop. My mom always said she felt something following her through the house. She'd move from one room to another and feel it behind her, close enough that she didn't want to turn around. My battery-powered toys would come on by themselves, too. They'd start making noise in an empty room, then stop as soon as someone walked in, as if they'd been caught. At one point, my mom had a priest and a medium come to the house to bless it and see what was going on. The medium told her there was a man there who was full of hatred, and a woman who wasn't evil, but deeply unhappy. That was the way it was described. The worst thing, though, happened in the middle of the night. My mom got a phone call from an unknown number at around 4 in the morning. She said the voice on the other end didn't sound male or female. It barely sounded human at first. It was wet and broken, like gurgling and cracking. Then it asked how her child was. After that, the sound went back to that horrible gurgling, and the call ended. My mom tried to call the number back, but couldn't. Something in her panicked, and she ran straight to my room. She found me tangled in my quilt, struggling to breathe. The medium had also said there were good spirits in the house, trying to hold back whatever was bad there. I don't know what to believe about that, but I do know it never felt like there was only one thing in that house. It felt layered, some of it sad, some of it angry, some of it watching. We eventually left and moved in with my grandparents because it became too much. Too many things had happened. Too many people had seen or felt something. This was around 2003 in the Gornal area. Since then, from what I've heard, that house has been on the market again and again. The medium had said the spirits were moving between the buildings because it was a terraced row, almost like the whole place was connected underneath the surface. I don't know exactly what it all means. I just know that house never felt empty. And even now, years later, I still remember standing at the bottom of those stairs, looking up at those dark faces, hearing them call me closer. I know this is going to sound strange, and honestly, part of me still feels awkward telling it. I've kept it to myself for a long time because I know how unlikely it sounds. But the memory is clear to me. It's not something I dreamed up later or exaggerated for effect. It happened, and even now, I don't really know what to make of it. When I was a kid, I was intense in ways I didn't understand yet. I wasn't just weird in a cute or funny way. I remember feeling like I had been dropped into the world by mistake, like being alive was some kind of punishment I hadn't agreed to. I was too serious too young, didn't connect well with other kids, and carried around this heavy feeling I couldn't explain. Even though I seemed mature in some ways, emotionally, I was a storm in a small body. Fear hit me hard. Anger hit me even harder. If I was scared, I would shake, cry, go pale, and completely lose control. But anger was different. I grew up in a home where expressing anger wasn't safe, so it all stayed locked inside me. And when it built up, it felt like my mind turned feral. Everything would narrow until there was nothing left except this hot, crushing rage. I don't feel anger like that anymore, thankfully. But back then, it was overwhelming. It didn't feel normal. It felt too big for a child. Too big for anyone, really. One night, I was in the bedroom I shared with my sister. I was trying to fall asleep because I had school the next morning, and I already felt irritated about having to wake up early. My head hurt. My pulse was loud in my ears, and I was lying there in that restless, miserable way children do when sleep refuses to come. In the room, I had a hamster. I loved that little creature. I really did. I took care of it carefully, probably better than most kids would have. I read guides, watched videos, made sure it had good food, treats, bedding, hay, wood to chew on, and enough space to live comfortably. I was proud of how well I cared for my small animals. But that night, just as I was finally starting to drift, the hamster woke up. Of course, that was normal. Hamsters are active at night. Usually the little noises didn't bother me. The digging, the scratching, the tapping against the glass, the tiny, busy sounds of a creature living its life. I was used to all of it. But that night, I couldn't stand it. The sound crawled under my skin. I remember lying completely still, not moving at all, but inside I was furious. Not annoyed at the situation, not annoyed at the noise. I was angry at the hamster itself, this innocent little animal I loved, and the feeling was awful. It was pure hatred for a few terrible moments, sharp and unreasonable and completely out of proportion. Then suddenly, the noise stopped. No scratching, no digging, no movement. Just silence, and my sister breathing nearby. I remember feeling relief first. That's the part that still bothers me. I was relieved. Then, eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I found the hamster dead. It was young, not even a year old. My other hamsters lived much longer, even when their setups weren't quite as carefully arranged. Maybe it was a coincidence. That's the reasonable answer, and I know that. But at the time, I didn't experience it as a question. I felt like I knew. Somehow, in a way I couldn't explain, I felt like my anger had caused it. I was sad, of course. I felt guilty too, but I didn't spiral over it. I didn't suddenly think I had powers or try to test it again. It was just this strange, quiet incident that stayed tucked away in my memory. Even now, with a much more skeptical mind, part of me still feels the same way I did then. I can't prove anything. I'm not saying I understand it. I just know how it felt. And it wasn't the only odd moment like that. Another time, I was walking home with my mother when she stopped to talk to someone she knew. I was tired and impatient, and the conversation kept dragging on. I tugged at her sleeve, hoping she'd get the hint, but she didn't. I got angry again, that same childish, burning anger. And right then, the woman's heel snapped. Just the shoe, thankfully, but still. Maybe all of it was coincidence. Maybe children notice strange timing and build meaning around it. I understand that possibility. But these memories have never left me. They sit there quietly, like little locked doors in the back of my mind. And every so often, I find myself wondering what really happened. Hey, I want to tell you about the time I bought my very first home back in 2004. I was beyond excited, absolutely thrilled to start this new chapter. Not long after moving in, a couple of neighbors started teasing me about a ghost in my house. At first, I thought they were just having a laugh, so I played along, saying I'd seen something too, just to keep the mood light. But as summer rolled on, I kept meeting more neighbors and, strangely enough, the same ghost story kept coming up. Then one afternoon, I found myself chatting with Mrs. Eliza, a kind-hearted elderly woman from down the street. I asked her straight up if there was any truth to the stories because, honestly, I needed to know. She didn't seem like the type to mess with me, and she shared the tale of the previous owner who bought the place but never actually lived there. She claimed it was haunted. Apparently, people had heard footsteps at night, soft sobbing sounds, and some even caught glimpses of a man sitting in the kitchen, covered in blood. One neighbor who helped with renovations swore that while hanging drywall, he felt something gently tug at his dreadlocks. I've had my own brush with the paranormal before, years ago, but I'd mostly written it off as night terrors by then. One day, I popped into a small neighborhood video rental store to grab a movie. While filling out their usual form with my details and credit card, the owner suddenly looked up and said, "Oh my goodness, you live in that house." I was curious and asked her what she meant. She explained that her former employee had died there, by suicide. She rushed over when she heard but found the place taped off by the police as a crime scene. This man had just moved in with his partner and had called his mom, wanting her to meet the person he loved and to come out to her. It was the early 90s, a time when coming out was still incredibly difficult. His mother already knew and disowned him over the phone. That same week, he received a letter from an HIV testing center confirming he was HIV positive, a diagnosis that felt like a death sentence back then. One evening, he sat in the kitchen, ate a bowl of cereal, and, tragically, took his own life. Since then, the video store owner has had her own eerie encounters, videos flying off shelves, even levitating at times. For me, the experiences have been subtler. Footsteps in the night, the sound of cereal pouring into a bowl, and I don't even eat cereal, and quiet sobbing from the kitchen. I'd often wake up hearing these sounds. My grandmother used to say, "When the dead come to you, they want something. Perform an act of charity in their name and pray for them." So I decided to do just that. One night, I lit a candle at the kitchen table and told him that every night I'd say a novena prayer for his soul. On the 9th night of the novena to St. Anthony, the patron saint of lost souls, I heard uncontrollable sobbing. I felt this deep presence of grief and despair, and the sound of someone struggling to breathe. But instead of fear, I felt a deep connection, a quiet intimacy and compassion that he needed. For 45 days, I prayed that novena with a candle lit, and I had a mass said in his name. Occasionally, I'd wake up sensing him standing over my bed, but it never felt harmful. These moments still happen now and then, though less often. It's a strange, bittersweet connection, a reminder that sometimes the spirits just want to be seen and remembered. Hey, I want to share something that happened to me recently. It was one of those nights I'll never forget. So I was deep asleep when, suddenly, my golden retriever Sunny started barking in this really urgent way. At first, I was half asleep and just rolled over, trying to wrap my arms around my wife. But then I remembered. She was away on a college trip with her students, so it was just me and Sunny. That's when I realized I needed to get up and check what was wrong. Sunny's not the type to bark at just any animal. She's a gentle, shy dog, about 5 years old, and mostly an indoor pup. We live on the edge of town, in a quiet neighborhood that usually gets peaceful after dark. The backyard backs directly onto a nature reserve with hiking trails, so sometimes wildlife passes nearby. As I was slowly heading towards the front door, I suddenly heard it rattling, like someone was trying to get in. That snapped me wide awake, and I rushed over. There, I found my little boy, Jame, fumbling with the doorknob like he'd never seen a door before. "Jame?" I said, confused. He was trying to open the door, but his hand kept slipping. When I spoke louder, he didn't even notice me. I gently touched his shoulder, worried he might be sleepwalking, and turned him around. He blinked awake, looked at me all sleepy, and said, "Dad?" I told him it was late and I'd take him back to bed just to be safe. We got back to the room and he was out cold again. Sunny followed close behind and I made sure we were all together. But then, bang, bang, bang! Something was pounding at the front door again. I looked over to Jame, but he wasn't in bed. The door to our room was open and Sunny was up, growling and confused. I ran to the front door and saw Jame trying to force it open, kicking and clawing at the frame. "Jame, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking. He started mumbling about something. It needs to get in. But I couldn't make sense of it. Then, when I turned him around, his eyes were flickering like a strobe light, completely white with no iris visible. I was terrified but snapped out of it, scooped him up, and calmed him down until he cried himself to sleep. I chalked it up to missing his mom and maybe having a nightmare. But when I went to check the back door, I found it open, the curtain fluttering in the breeze. Sunny started growling fiercely, so I grabbed a fireplace poker and cautiously approached. I flipped on the backyard light and pulled the curtain aside. There was nothing. The growling stopped immediately. I slammed the door shut and locked it tight, realizing maybe I'd forgotten to lock it earlier while making dinner for Jame and Sunny. I sat down in my wife's makeup chair. She usually sits there in the morning, to try and stay awake. It was just after 2 a.m., and I had hours to wait for sunrise. I thought about calling my wife, but decided to wait until morning. Sunny was pacing, looking for food, so I went to heat up some chicken. When I came back, Jame was sitting up in bed, staring at me with a look no 4-year-old should have. I froze. Then he said, "The Nightwalkers have come to our home. They're stalking us. They crave the blood they thirst for." My legs went weak, and I had to hold onto the doorframe. Then, just like that, he fell back asleep. Suddenly, I heard Sunny let out a terrible scream, then silence. Jame woke up shaking with fear. I ran to the kitchen and found Sunny lying in a pool of blood. I'd never heard a dog make that sound before. I knelt down, grabbed a towel, and rolled her over. There were 3 huge slashes along her side. I was sobbing, trying to understand how this happened. There was no blood anywhere else. Jame came up behind me and asked, "Dad, why is the back door open?" I hushed him and sent him back to my room while I locked every door and called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. Felt like forever. They checked the house but found nothing. They called their canine unit for Sunny, but there were no answers about how the door had opened twice when I was sure I locked it. After they left, I cleaned up and showered, trying to wash away the horror. I made a drink and locked my bedroom door before finally falling asleep around 4 a.m. Now it's morning, and I'm about to call my wife to tell her everything. I miss Sunny so much, but I'm even more worried about what Jame said. The Night Walkers. What could that mean? Is it just my imagination, or something more? I'm not sure if I should stay here when my wife gets back, or go somewhere else. Maybe it was a wild animal, like a mountain lion, but how do I explain the door opening on its own? Only time will tell. I'll keep you updated if anything else happens. Thanks for listening. You know, growing up in a small suburban town in California back in the early 80s was something special. I'm Emily, and I want to take you back to those days when life felt simple and neighbors were like an extended family. We didn't have smartphones or endless TV channels, just a handful of stations you caught through a rooftop antenna, and if you wanted to talk to someone, you picked up the corded phone on the wall. Our street, Maple Street, was lined with big, old trees perfect for climbing, and it was quiet, just the way I liked it. I was the kid who always made friends with the new neighbors, the one who'd be out playing with all the kids after school. Every neighborhood had its own mom and pop family, right? The kind where mom baked treats to share, and pop showed off magic tricks or invited us into his workshop. On Maple Street, the mom and pop were the Harrisons. Mrs. Harrison was warm and kind, always with a plate of cookies ready for the neighborhood kids. Mr. Harrison, well, he was more reserved. They had a son, but he wasn't around much, at least not that I noticed. As time went on, things felt different. Mr. Harrison would take his usual walks, but after a few houses, Mrs. Harrison would catch up to him and they'd walk back together. I started noticing he'd watch me while I played outside, making a little jingling sound with coins in his pocket, trying to get my attention. When I went over, he'd whisper things I couldn't quite hear, and then Mrs. Harrison would come out and pull him away. Eventually, my family moved across the street from the Harrisons. Mr. Harrison didn't say much, but would stand and watch me, the coins jingling in his pocket whenever I looked his way. Then one day, Mrs. Harrison ended up in the hospital. My mom later told me it was all the stress she'd been under. After that, I saw their son more often. He seemed quiet, sad even, but I didn't understand why. My mom would often help Mrs. Harrison when she came home from the hospital. Sometimes Mr. Harrison invited me to his workshop behind their house. We'd make small wooden things together, and he'd give me little treasures, a marble, a pop-top, or a broken chain, making them seem like precious gifts. I didn't think much of it. Their son would watch from the porch, but I was too young to realize what it all meant. One day, my mom sent me over with some baked goods. While Mrs. Harrison was in the kitchen, Mr. Harrison pulled me aside and pressed something into my hand, a purple heart medal. I told him it was too important and he should keep it. When Mrs. Harrison came around the corner and took the medal, he shouted and tried to hit her. I ran home scared, and my mom just whispered, "That poor woman, what she endures." Later, I learned that Mr. Harrison suffered from PTSD and was often cruel to his wife. It was heartbreaking. A few months down the line, as I crossed the street to visit a friend, Mr. Harrison grabbed my wrist suddenly, looked me in the eyes, and said, "I love you. Will you marry me?" I told him I was just a little girl and he should go home. Then he handed me a big diamond ring, too large for my finger, insisting I accept it and say yes. I told him it was too much and belonged to his wife, but he was persistent. I took it home, thinking it wasn't serious. When I showed my mom, she realized it was real, and that it was Mrs. Harrison's wedding ring, lost for weeks. Soon after, there was chaos on our street, sirens, flashing lights. Mr. Harrison had taken his own life in their living room. Their son had to clean up after him. That neighborhood was never the same. My family moved shortly after. Looking back, those quiet streets held stories no one could see behind closed doors. I hope sharing this helps remind us all to look out for one another, even when things seem calm on the surface. Hey there, I want to share something really special and a little strange with you. Something that's been unfolding around my home in the Pacific Northwest. It's a place that feels like magic, where the skies stretch endlessly, the air is fresh and crisp, and sometimes you just get the sense that fairies could be hiding just around the corner. My family and I have lived here for nearly 3 years now, in a cozy farm-style house surrounded by about 10 acres of land with Mount Rainier watching over us. There's a big garage connected to a workshop, and right next to us is dense forest. We've had some unusual experiences on this land, things that you just can't explain away easily. Sometimes, late at night, we hear eerie screams coming from the woods, and all the animals fall completely silent. There's this strange sound too, like a metal chair scraping on concrete, echoing through the fields. I talked to a couple of young men who live nearby, closer to the forest, and they told me they hear these sounds too. But they stay indoors after dark because it feels like something is watching them. They believe this land holds something unusual. One of the young men even said he sees a shadow kid in his room and around the house, something that scares him and messes with his things. I don't think it's anything evil, but it's definitely unsettling. When we first moved here, I tried to match the sounds we heard to local wildlife, but nothing fit. One night, I was driving home down a quiet road, lit only by a few streetlights, when I saw a flash of eyes. I slowed down, thinking it might be a deer. But when my headlights shone on the spot, I saw something else entirely. A grayish-white figure, about the size of a man, crawling into the bushes. It had no fur, no tail, no feathers, just smooth, pale skin and strong muscles. It moved quickly and silently, and when I turned the corner hoping to catch another glimpse, it was gone. Over the years, several family members have seen a tall, pale creature, about 7 feet tall with large, curious eyes. Sometimes it peeks around the workshop or looks in through the garage window. My son even spotted it crouched on all fours on a long couch near my bedroom window, its big, round eyes glowing softly as it studied him like an owl would. But it wasn't an owl. My daughter once saw it standing in the tall grass of the field when she was searching for something she dropped. They both ran back to the house in a hurry. She also saw it once on the roof of the garage, tilting its head as if curious, and when she called my son over, it vanished. I remember thinking she might have been imagining things, but hearing her story again recently, she described it perfectly. Even the dogs have reacted to something unseen. One evening, I let them out before bed, and they suddenly became terrified, rushing back inside and staring wildly, as if something was looming just outside the door. I looked for a shadow on the garage wall, and what I saw was tall enough to block the light from 2 different lamps. My granddaughter keeps her blinds closed after dark because she feels uneasy, even though there's no one around. We're not scared exactly, just aware that this place is different. These experiences aren't constant, but they're real enough to make us wonder. At first, I thought maybe it was some unknown animal, But after nearly 3 years, and so many of us seeing the same thing, I believe there's something more here, something mysterious, something beyond our understanding. And honestly, I wouldn't trade this place for anywhere else in the world. Hey, I want to share a story that's been with me for a long time. Something my mom once told me about flies being messengers of something dark. I didn't really get it until my own experience proved her right. When my son Caleb was little, his dad Mark and I worked in maintenance and painting for a real estate company out in the desert near Palmdale, California. We had a serious problem with tenants stealing tools from our garage, so the company owner sent us to fix up this small, old house on the outskirts of town. Apparently, the last tenants left in a hurry, leaving everything behind. The house, the garage, the backyard packed with stuff. We just had to clean up, do some minor repairs, and paint. In return, we were promised a unit behind Mark's parents' place once the work was done, which was a huge relief. We were excited, not just to leave the old place, but because the new spot had space for our dogs to run around. We started working on the house right away. It was old, set back from the road with just one streetlight flickering nearby, and a big construction dumpster sitting out front. When we finally moved in, it was clear why the previous tenants left so fast. Caleb's room was right across from ours, and often at night, I'd hear him groaning softly. When I checked on him, he'd be half fallen off the bed, blankets on the floor. I thought he was just restless. Then one morning, while I was fixing a drawer, Caleb told me about a little boy who lived in his room. At first, I thought it was just a dream, but he looked me straight in the eyes and insisted it was real. You have to know, Caleb had a big imagination. He talked to his shoes and his toys, so I wasn't too worried. But then strange things started happening. I'd wake up with small red circles on my arms that turned into bruises, and Mark found scratches on his back he didn't remember getting. Mark didn't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal, so we just brushed it off, focusing on fixing up the house. But one morning, Caleb came out crying, scared like I'd never seen before. Between sobs, he told me the boy in his room had grown into a monster and had grabbed his foot. When I looked, his sock was twisted in a way that just didn't make sense, and his big toe was bruised with a small cut. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. I called my mom, who's very spiritual, and she told me to cleanse the house with sage and salt. So I did, even though Mark teased me. That night, after we put Caleb between us in bed, I was suddenly jolted awake by a slap on my cheek and a voice screaming, "Wake up!" in my ear. The whole house was vibrating, and even the ceiling fan chain was swinging. Mark grabbed a bat and ran out, thinking there was an intruder when he saw a distorted face reflected in the glass doors. But there was no one there. Mark started to wonder if the house might be haunted. Days later, my mom came to visit with my older kids and sister. She immediately felt a heavy dread as they got closer. Inside, she noticed a foul smell like something dead. Soon, flies swarmed the house in thick clouds, covering the ceiling and walls. We couldn't find any source. My mom said whatever was in the house didn't want them there, and she felt drained and sick, needing to rest in the van. The kids tried to make a game out of vacuuming up the flies, but no one wanted to stay inside that house. After a restless night, I asked my mom to take Caleb with them for his safety. 30 minutes after they left, all the flies vanished as if by magic. Later, a friend named Bonnie, who'd studied the occult, came to help us finish cleaning the garage. It was dark, dusty, and strangely cool despite the summer heat. Among the junk, we found jars filled with a brown liquid and strange things floating inside, sealed with wax and wrapped with hair. Bonnie found creepy items like a crow's beak, a chicken claw, a feather quill, and even human teeth. Then, when a jar broke, it revealed a pentagram painted on the floor beneath layers of dirt and sand, and some kind of animal embryo floated out. We both freaked out and ran. After that, we never slept in that house again. We stayed with Bonnie's mom and eventually moved to a new place. Years later, Caleb, now 25, remembers those times vividly, even though he was so young. The kids all recall sucking flies out of the air but never knew why. It's strange how some memories stick with you, even when the reasons remain a mystery. Thanks for listening. I want to tell this as plainly as I can, because even saying it out loud still feels a little unreal. I'm 18, and I live in a rural part of Eastern Virginia, out near Prince George County. I'm sharing the location only because I'm hoping someone from around here might recognize what I'm talking about, or maybe has heard something similar. I know this probably sounds strange, and I know it's easy to brush off stories like this, but this is something I experienced myself. The first time it happened, it was late, maybe around 10:30 at night. I had stepped outside near the driveway because sometimes I just need a little air. The yard was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet where every little sound feels louder than it should. Then, from somewhere off toward the woods behind my house, I heard a woman's voice. It wasn't loud. It sounded distant, almost thin, but I heard it clearly enough. "Help me." That was all it said. I didn't stand there trying to figure it out. I went straight back inside, locked the door, and tried to convince myself I had misheard it. About a week later, maybe closer to 2, I went outside again late at night. This time it was around 1 in the morning, and I was only taking some trash out. I was walking down the driveway when I heard another sound from that same direction behind the house. It was a dull, knocking sound. Not like a branch tapping, not like an animal scratching. It sounded like someone hitting the bottom of their fist against a wooden door. Slow, heavy thuds. The kind of sound you know when you hear it. I froze for a second, listened, and then got myself back inside. The third time was the worst one. I had gone outside to grab a few things from my van. While I was walking across the yard, I heard sticks snapping in the woods. At first, I told myself it was probably deer. We get them around here all the time, so I kept moving. Then something hissed at me. It was close, much closer than I expected. And it wasn't a normal animal sound. I've heard deer blow and snort. I've heard cats hiss. I've heard raccoons, possums, all kinds of things moving around at night. This was different. It was raspy and harsh, almost like it came from something trying to sound like an animal, but not quite getting it right. That one scared me more than anything else. After that, things stayed quiet for a while. I started to wonder if maybe I had just worked myself up over nothing. Then today happened. I was over at my neighbor's place with my friend Mason, who's 16. We were helping fix up an old weed eater, just standing around talking while we worked. Mason has always hated being outside late around here. He's told me before that he hears things in the woods near his house, but I never really took it seriously. I figured he was just nervous. While we were talking, I mentioned to my neighbor, Mr. Harris, what I had been hearing. He's in his 60s, a Vietnam vet, originally from North Carolina. He's one of those quiet, practical men who doesn't waste words and doesn't scare easy. When I told him, he paused. Mason walked off for a minute, and as soon as he was gone, Mr. Harris lowered his voice and said, "Well, son, I'll tell you this. I've been woken up around 2 or 3 in the morning by tapping on my window. That's what got me. Because now it wasn't just me. It wasn't just Mason being nervous in the dark. This was a man who has lived a hard life, a man who doesn't seem like the type to make things up or get spooked over nothing. And he was hearing things too. I still don't know what's out there, or what could be making those sounds. Maybe there's some reasonable explanation. Maybe there isn't. But something strange has been happening around these woods, and I'd really like to know if anyone else has heard it too. Hey there, I want to share a story from when I was a little girl, about 4 years old, living in a quiet neighborhood in Los Angeles back in 1972. It was a time when doors stayed unlocked and kids played outside until the streetlights flickered on. I was the youngest of 6 kids, pretty small for my age. One sunny afternoon, my siblings were busy riding their bikes and playing outside. I really wanted a ride on my brother Danny's bike, but he was helping my sister Lisa with something. I remember jumping up and down on the sidewalk, begging for a turn. Eventually, my sister Rachel gave in. She was a bit stubborn and didn't always follow the rules, like wearing shoes while biking, which Mom always insisted on. Rachel lifted me onto the back of her bike, which had that old-fashioned banana seat, and told me to hold on tight. But then I noticed there was nowhere to put my feet, no pegs at all. I got scared and told her over and over, No, I changed my mind." But she was determined and said it would be fine if I just held my feet out wide. As she pedaled, the bike swayed, and suddenly, whoosh, my foot slipped into the spokes. I felt a sharp pain and saw blood everywhere. I started screaming. Rachel scooped me up and ran straight inside, past the other kids. Mom and my oldest sister Anna were horrified. My sister Grace wrapped my foot with a towel and ran outside to the car where we all piled in, leaving Danny and Lisa at home. The ride to the hospital was a blur, Mom honking the horn and crying, Anna chatting nonstop, Grace soothing me, wiping my tears. I was probably in shock because the pain was just starting to throb. We must have looked like a frantic bunch, blood and all. At the hospital, the smell of rubbing alcohol and antiseptic hit me as they rushed me to a metal table. When they unwrapped my foot, I saw the mangled mess where my toe used to be. Mom kept telling me it'd be okay, but I could tell she was worried. They asked if they had the toe. Mom called home and sent Danny and Lisa to find it. Now, here's the funny part. Danny and Lisa walked back to the spot, looking everywhere. An old lady on her porch asked what they were doing. When Danny said they were looking for my toe so the doctors could sew it back on, she said she'd seen it but threw it in the big dumpster. So Danny climbed in and dug through the trash to find it. Lisa was shocked, but helped him get a ride back to the hospital. The neighbor gave them a lift, though she was a bit grossed out by Danny smelling like garbage. Meanwhile, I was still in the room getting numbed with long needles, crying my eyes out. I asked Mom what she was doing when she closed her eyes, and she told me to imagine a white light all around me, that it was God's healing light. I tried to calm down, but the pain was too much. Then, before surgery, I begged Mom to stay, but the doctor said no. As she held me, I saw a bright light behind her shoulder. I squinted and saw a man with long, dark hair, caramel skin, dressed in a flowing orange robe, smiling warmly. Next to him stood a radiant male figure, glowing with light that filled the room. I felt warmth and peace wash over me. I told Mom not to worry, that my guardian angel and his companion were right there. She looked confused, and my sister Grace didn't see them either. They wheeled me into the OR, gave me medicine to sleep, and I floated above my body, watching the doctors work. The man in orange extended his hand, and the angel smiled reassuringly. I overheard the doctor say his own daughter was very sick and needed an important operation soon. The angel nodded and smiled. Moments later, I returned to my body and woke up to Mom's tearful smile. The doctor said I'd need more surgeries and might limp, but I was lucky it wasn't worse. Since no regular rooms were free, they put me in the pediatric burn ward. It smelled strange and was chilly. The bed was a big metal crib with bars like a cage. The other girls had sad stories. One caught her nightgown on fire, another played with matches, things I didn't understand. That night, after everyone left, I felt lonely and cold. I started to cry quietly, soaking my pillow. Then, the same warmth I'd felt before returned, and a gentle hand held mine through the bars. I felt safe and soon drifted to sleep. The next morning, a girl across from me spoke. She asked about the light I'd had the night before. I told her it was my angel, and though she couldn't see, I believed she had one too. It seemed to comfort her. My family visited, and the next day I was ready to go home. On the way out, I insisted on seeing the doctor who fixed my toe. I whispered a thank you and told him his daughter would be just fine, that she wouldn't be sick anymore. Then I kissed his cheek. He looked surprised but hugged Mom tightly. On the ride home, I told Mom about my new friends and the angels who helped me. She said that I'd always been special, saying things others didn't understand. I miss my mom dearly, but I carry those memories and the warmth of those angels with me always. My name in this story is Anya. This happened back in 2023, sometime between June and August, around the time of the blue moon. I was still in college then, and one evening, my friend Mara and I were walking to one of our seniors' rooms for dinner. It was a few days after the blue moon, and I remember the two of us stepping outside and suddenly feeling something. I don't really know how to explain it. It wasn't a sound, and it wasn't something we saw. It was more like the air shifted around us, like something brushed past a part of us we didn't know could feel. We both noticed it at the exact same time, but neither of us said anything. We just acted normal. At that point, Mara and I were friends, but we weren't close enough to casually say, "Hey, did you also feel something strange and impossible just now?" So we kept walking. We kept quiet. And honestly, I think both of us were hoping it was nothing. But after that night, things started happening. I began feeling like something had attached itself to me. I could feel it poking me, especially around my back, and with it came this coldness. Not normal cold. Not the kind you feel from weather or air conditioning. This was deeper than that. It felt like the cold had slipped under my skin and settled into my bones. I started wondering if maybe we had stepped into something we weren't supposed to. Like, for a brief moment, the two worlds had a crack between them, and somehow Mara and I had noticed it. After that, I became aware of energies around me. I never saw them physically with my eyes, but if I focused, I could see their shapes in my mind. Almost like my mind's eye was picking up what my actual eyes couldn't. At first, I genuinely thought I might be losing it. I thought maybe I was imagining things, or maybe stress was getting to me, or maybe there was something wrong with me. But then Mara started reacting to the same things I was feeling. Not once, not vaguely, repeatedly. We finally started talking about it, very quietly and carefully, like saying it too loudly would make it more real. Both of us admitted we had been scared. Both of us had wondered if we were going crazy. So we tested each other. One day, during class, I felt that same poking sensation in my back. I didn't say anything to Mara. I just sat there, trying to ignore it. Then she leaned toward me and whispered, "Does your back hurt?" I froze. I tried not to show how shaken I was, so I whispered back, "Why do you ask?" She didn't answer right away. She looked past me, toward the space behind my chair. Then she looked down, and that was the moment I knew we weren't imagining it, because in my mind, I could see someone crouching behind me, poking my back. It felt like a woman, or something close to one. Not angry, not threatening, just curious, almost childlike, like it was poking me because it could. Later, Mara described the exact same thing to me. She said it didn't feel malicious. It didn't seem like it wanted to harm me. It was just there, crouched low, poking at me, and that was exactly what I had sensed. After that, we began to understand that I seemed to attract these energies, while Mara was better at sensing them and seeing them in her mind. And once we noticed them, they felt everywhere. Every day there was at least one attached to me or lingering near me. Some places had stronger ones. Some felt heavy or malicious. Some felt natural, almost ancient, like they belonged to the place itself. We also started noticing them around other people. Some people had energies attached to them that felt protective. Some had ones that seemed to work for them somehow. Others felt like they were being used, like something was treating them as a vessel or feeding off something from them. We met people who seemed to amplify these energies without knowing it. Some people seemed to neutralize them, and a few people, somehow, could push them away completely. To this day, I still don't know exactly what Mara and I experienced. Now, we mostly keep that part of our minds closed. We act ignorant. We don't talk about it unless we absolutely have to. It was the most draining, confusing, nauseating period of my life, and I don't say that lightly. But I do believe Mara is protected by one or more of the energies I mentioned. Whatever protects her is very strong and very watchful. I also believe I'm safe and alive today because of her. We've had other strange and paranormal things happen to us and to people we know, but this is the one story we keep coming back to. Because even now, after everything, we still want to know what really happened to us. I'm from Costa Rica, so just to give you a little context, everything here feels close. The country is small enough that you can drive from one side to the other in about 7 or 8 hours, and if you feel like heading into the mountains or finding some little adventure, it usually only takes a couple of hours to get somewhere interesting. So last Tuesday night, I was bored out of my mind, and a drive sounded perfect. A couple of friends and I decided to go off-roading in the mountains, out near San Rafael in Heredia. There's this place people call Finca Dos, and it's basically a big 4x4 area where people go to mess around in the mud, try trails, and just enjoy the cars for a while. The thing is, once you get up there, it feels really isolated. During the day, there are tourist spots, reserves, and private properties around, but at night it's different. It gets quiet in a way that makes every sound feel louder. When we arrived, something already felt a little strange. The first thing we noticed was a light far off in the distance. We couldn't tell what it was. Maybe a motorcycle, maybe a guard from one of the nearby properties, or maybe someone on a bike. At the time, none of us thought much of it, but it stayed in the back of my mind. We spent some time driving the trails and playing around in the mud. Everything was normal for a while, until we started getting ready to leave. That's when a guy in another off-road vehicle came flying past us on the dirt road. He was going way too fast for that area, especially at night. He didn't stop, didn't seem interested in entering the 4x4 trails, and didn't even slow down like he wanted to talk or join us. It wasn't exactly terrifying, but it felt wrong. There was no reason to drive like that on a dark mountain road in the middle of nowhere. Then came the weirdest part. We were already outside the main area, getting ready to head home, when out of nowhere, a man on a bicycle came walking out from the trees. Now, people do ride bikes around there. That part isn't impossible. But this was around 11 at night, on a weekday, deep in the mountains. And what really bothered me was that he was completely clean and dry. That area is known for mud, off-road trails, and mountain biking paths. We had been out there long enough to know that anyone coming through those trails should have had at least some mud on them. But he didn't. He had lights, a helmet, and protective gear, so he looked prepared. Still, it felt like he had just appeared. Not arrived. Appeared. My friends and I didn't say much at first, but we all seemed to understand the same thing at the same time. That was our sign to leave. Up to that point, I wouldn't have called anything paranormal. Strange, yes. Uncomfortable, definitely. But not paranormal. What changed my mind was what happened on the way down. There is only one road in and one road out of that place. And after that, there's one main road that leads from the mountains back toward the nearest town. We drove slowly enough to be careful, but fast enough that there's no way someone on a bicycle should have disappeared ahead of us. And yet, we never saw him. Not on the side of the road, not riding downhill, not stopped anywhere. Nothing. A guy on a bike should not have been faster than a car on that road, especially with all the curves and sharp turns. But somehow, he was just gone. And that's the part I still can't explain. I want to tell you about something that still unsettles me, even now. This happened about 4 years ago, when the house I grew up in was being rebuilt from the ground up. It was an old place, close to 40 years old, and aside from a few cheap touch-ups over the years, it had never really been properly repaired. My family life was never especially happy. My parents had their struggles, and the four of us were living with my grandparents too, so the house was always crowded with tension. The one person who somehow kept everything from falling apart was my mother. When she left, everything changed, and I do not just mean emotionally. The whole house felt different. It was as if whatever warmth had lived there went with her. You know how some places feel alive, even when they are messy or imperfect. After she was gone, that feeling disappeared. It stopped feeling like a home and became just a building. Maybe that was grief talking. Maybe I simply missed her more than I understood at the time. But the change felt real. The rebuilding began not long after. It was the middle of summer, and while the construction was going on, we rented a tiny one-room place nearby. The upper floor of the house was finished first because it was meant more for practical living than for appearances. So we moved into that top floor while the ground level was still under construction. I remember how dull it felt. The walls were painted in these cold, washed-out shades of blue-gray, and the whole floor had this strange emptiness to it. I kept myself busy during the day. I have always had a million hobbies and little obsessions, so between school and my own interests, I did not think too much about the atmosphere. But nighttime was different. Every night, this heavy sense of dread would settle over me. I had experienced sleep paralysis before, so it was not something completely new. But after moving back into that rebuilt house, it became much worse, more frequent, more intense. I would wake up in the middle of the night, unable to move, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. It felt like something was pressing down on my chest. Not just pressure, but presence. Like something was there with me, and I wanted it gone. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I would be gasping, terrified, soaked in panic. I got used to it in the way people get used to bad weather, but I never stopped fearing it. Then, about a week after we moved in, something else started. One night, I was awake later than usual, maybe around 11:30. That was when I heard it for the first time. A scream. It was distant, but clear enough to make my whole body go cold. What frightened me most was not that it sounded pained. It did not. It was almost worse than that. It sounded empty, like someone was screaming out of habit or for no reason at all. The sound came at fixed intervals, again and again, every 10 seconds or so, always the same pitch, always the same length. There was something mechanical about the pattern, but the voice sounded like a woman's. It went on for hours that night, until around 2:30 in the morning. I barely slept. The next night it happened again. Same timing, same rhythm, same eerie repetition. And then again the night after that. Soon I could almost picture where it was coming from without even looking. Behind our house, there was a narrow alley between two residential buildings. It was the kind of shortcut most people avoided, usually occupied by drunks or men you would rather not pass alone. I had hardly ever walked through it myself, but in my mind, that was where the sound came from. I could feel it. That alley was visible from the balcony connected to my father's room, but the screaming kept happening. And then one night, everything changed. It was hotter than usual, and I could not sleep. I got up for water and found my father awake in his room, sitting with his phone in his hand like he often did when his insomnia was bad. The balcony door was wide open because the night air, even warm, felt better than the heat trapped inside. I asked him if he wanted some water too. He took the bottle, drank a little, and set it aside. Then he looked toward the balcony and said, very calmly, "Can you see her too?" I still remember how those words made my stomach drop. He pointed toward the alley, and there she was. A woman standing under the streetlight. She was wearing red, or maybe dark crimson, something deep and unmistakable in that pale light. She was completely still, not shifting her weight, not turning her head, not fidgeting, nothing. Her arms hung straight at her sides, and she was facing directly toward our balcony. I could not make out her face. I could not tell you anything about her expression. But I knew she was looking at us, or at least in our direction. I froze. I did not speak. My mind just emptied out. All I could do was stare. And then, strangely, that was the end of it. After the housewarming ceremony, the screams stopped. Just like that. No more sound in the night. No more woman in the alley. I never saw her again, and I am deeply grateful for that. But even now, when I think about that house, that rebuilt upper floor, those nights of dread, and that figure in red under the streetlight, I still feel the same chill creeping up my spine. I cannot explain what happened. I only know that it did. So this happened about 4 years ago, during the COVID period, when I was hosting a live call-in psychic show. I worked alongside a medium and the show's sponsor, and most broadcasts ran for a couple of hours, with plenty of callers and guests. But honestly, this story is not really about the show itself. It is about a place. The sponsor had arranged for us to film at Combe Abbey, near Coventry, in England. Because of the restrictions at the time, we were not allowed inside the building, but we did get permission to film outside. I remember being driven there by the sponsor, and it was also my first time meeting the psychic in person. I was nervous, more than I wanted to admit. You never quite know what someone like that is seeing, sensing, or quietly thinking, and that played on my mind a little. We arrived in the early afternoon, around 2 o'clock, on a bright day in late spring. The weather was beautiful, calm and sunny, and everything felt pretty normal at first. We had only been there about 10 minutes, setting up the camera and getting ready, when the sponsor suddenly called out to me and told me to look up at one of the windows. When I did, I saw her. There was a woman standing in the window. She looked like she belonged to another time, almost Edwardian or Victorian in appearance, and she was moving back and forth in a way that made it seem as though she was opening and closing curtains. But what made it so unsettling was that she was transparent. Not vague, not imagined, not a trick of the light. Transparent. Exactly the kind of ghostly figure people describe in films, except this was right there in front of me. And the strangest part was that I did not feel afraid. I had never seen anything like that before in my life, and yet I just stood there, watching. The rest of the filming went ahead, and although the atmosphere had definitely changed, we finished the shoot and headed back. On the drive home, we talked about everything that had happened, especially the woman at the window. I kept trying to make sense of it, replaying it in my head. When I got dropped off and walked toward my front door, my security light flicked on, and that is when I saw something else. A shadow figure. It was there for only a moment, but I saw it clearly enough. It moved away from me and disappeared around the corner of the house. I cannot fully explain why, but in that instant, I felt certain that something had followed me home. I had heard people use the word attachment before, and that was the first time I really thought I understood what they meant. I did not know exactly what it was, only that it did not feel right. After that, little by little, things in my life began to unravel. At first, it was smaller things: falling outs, bad luck, tension where there had not been any before. I spoke to the psychic who had been there with us and told him what I had seen, but he did not seem too concerned. Maybe he genuinely did not think it was serious, but that never really settled my mind. Then the problems kept building. Over the next few years, it felt like one thing after another. I got banned from a pub I had been going to for years over something petty and ridiculous. I had an argument with a close friend and damaged the trust between us. Then more things followed, and worse ones. Relationships broke down. Money disappeared. I lost stability, then security, then eventually my home. In the last year especially, it has felt relentless. Like every direction I turn, there is another setback, another betrayal, another blow. I have been scammed, let down, and worn down to the point where I have honestly started wondering whether I am cursed. Maybe I am searching for answers because I am exhausted. Maybe I am trying to connect dots that were never really connected. But when you have been through enough hurt, enough loss, enough chaos, you start to question everything. And that is where I am now. I am not feeling very steady, not very focused, and I honestly do not know what to make of any of it. But I know what I saw, and I know how much changed after that day. You know, some places stay with you long after you leave them. For me, it was my grandmother's family estate in rural Bangladesh. My family is originally from Bangladesh, but I was born in the US, and because my father worked as a diplomat, we were always moving from one place to another. Still, every summer, without fail, we'd go back to Bangladesh to see family. And the place I looked forward to most was this old ancestral estate on my mother's side. It was enormous. High ceilings, colored glass windows, long verandas, ponds behind the courtyard, and trees so thick they seemed to hold their own secrets. Even as a child, I could feel that the house carried history in its bones. I loved it. It felt far away from the noise of the city, almost like stepping into another world. Of course, people always had stories about that place. My relatives had their versions, and the villagers had theirs. Strange sightings, unexplained sounds, things that moved through the property at night. Back then, I treated it all like folklore. Just stories people pass down because old houses make people imaginative. Then, one summer, when I was about 11, something happened that I still cannot explain. It was very late at night. All the adults had already gone to bed, and only my 2 cousins and I were still awake. We were sitting in the courtyard, just talking quietly, enjoying the night air. Beyond the courtyard were the ponds and the woods, and usually you could hear everything: crickets, frogs, rustling leaves, the constant hum of life. Then, all at once, everything stopped. Not faded, stopped. It was so sudden that the silence itself felt loud. We all noticed it at the same time, and our conversation just died in the middle of a sentence. Before I could even make sense of it, I looked at my cousin sitting across from me and saw her face change completely. She looked terrified, absolutely frozen. I asked her what was wrong, and in this tiny whisper, she said, "There's someone behind you." I turned slightly, confused, because from where I was sitting, I couldn't see anyone behind her at all. But then the cousin beside me inhaled sharply and said the same thing, that something was there. And that's when I felt it. You know that feeling when someone is standing too close behind you, even before you see them? That pressure in the air, that instinctive awareness. The back of my neck went cold. The little hairs on my arms lifted. I felt this faint movement of air behind me, like someone large was walking very slowly past us. Then it stopped on my left side. There was this smell, too. I still remember it. Something rotten, but mixed with a strong floral scent, almost like perfume or old oil. And then something touched my hair. Not hard, just lightly, but enough. Enough that I felt it clearly. A moment later, one strand of my hair lifted, like someone had taken it between their fingers. My cousins saw it too. That was all it took. I grabbed both of them and we ran. There was a bedroom nearby where one of my great uncles was sleeping. We rushed inside, shut the door, and crawled under the bed without even waking him at first. We were shaking so badly we could barely breathe. And then we saw the shadow. From under the bed, we watched it move slowly across the floor outside the door. Then it stopped there, waiting. What unsettles me most, even now, is that all three of us saw the same thing. 2 feet outside the door. They looked like a woman's feet, but something was wrong. 1 foot faced toward the room, and the other pointed the opposite way. Even after it was gone, none of us came out right away. We stayed under that bed in complete silence until I finally reached up and shook my great uncle awake. We told him we were frightened and asked if he could take us back to the room where we were sleeping. What stayed with me almost as much as what we saw was his reaction. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss us. He just looked at us and asked, very calmly, "Did you see something?" I nodded. He got up, checked outside the door, and quietly walked us back across the estate. None of us slept that night. Not long after, the animals started. The livestock on the property suddenly began crying out all at once. The stray dogs outside started barking too. It was loud enough to wake other people in the house, and the whole atmosphere felt wrong, like something had unsettled everything living around us. After maybe 10 minutes, it all stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The next morning, we talked about what happened. I honestly expected the adults to brush it off, maybe tell us we imagined it because we were tired and scared. But that didn't happen. No one really questioned us. The caretaker simply said the animals sometimes react when they see things moving around the house, things they do not like. That sentence has never left me. My mother forbade us from staying up alone again after that, and I didn't argue. I barely slept the next couple of nights anyway. I went back to that estate once more after that trip, and nothing happened, at least not to me. Then life moved on, the way it always does. School, adulthood, distance, time. I haven't been back to Bangladesh nearly as often as I would like, but I'm planning to return this summer, and apparently the family wants to visit the estate again after all these years. And I'll be honest with you, part of me still feels like that child in the courtyard. Because it's one thing to hear stories. It's one thing to doubt them, explain them away, tuck them into the folder labeled folklore. It's another thing entirely to feel something touch you in the dark. Okay, so I need to tell you this exactly the way it felt, because even now, I cannot shake it. A while back, my fiance and I had to move into his parents' old farmhouse in rural Indiana after money got tight. The place sits near open land and a stretch of woods, and ever since I got here, things have felt wrong. Not in a vague, nervous way. I mean, I've seen shapes outside the windows at night that looked like they were watching me. One evening, both my fiance and I saw what looked like a structure at the edge of the tree line, almost like an old shed or building, and then it was just gone. And more than once, standing outside after dark, I've had this awful pull toward the woods, like something out there wanted my attention. I do have trauma, and I've had nightmares for years, so I tried to be rational about it. But those dreams had finally started fading, and then suddenly, after moving here, they came back. Only these felt different. Sharper, heavier, like they weren't just coming from me. Around the same time, I also started struggling to fall asleep until really late, which is unusual for me. The night this happened, I was heading upstairs to our room. This house has animals everywhere, so hearing paws or movement usually wouldn't mean much. But I heard something behind me that sounded like a cat, and instantly every part of me knew it was not a cat. I didn't stop to check. I ran upstairs, shut the door, and eventually fell asleep. At first, the dream was normal enough. Then it changed all at once. I was in a house that was similar to the one we live in now, but not exactly the same. My fiancé was there, his mom was there, and her service dog was there too. Except in the dream, I called her Calla instead of Callie. She's normally this big, fluffy black dog with the sweetest face, the kind of dog that looks like she was put on Earth just to love people. But in the dream, something was off immediately. Everyone kept insisting she was some other animal, something ridiculous, and the more they said it, the less she looked like herself. She started following me from room to room with this awful expression, like she was waiting for the right moment to hurt me. And in the dream, I was completely certain she was going to kill me. Then a porch light went dark across the road, and my fiancé said, very matter-of-factly, that an old man had died. I remember trying to explain to him and his mom that the dog wasn't really a dog, that I knew something was wrong. And right in the middle of that, I looked outside, and there was a man standing there watching me. Just standing there. I screamed. By then, the animal beside me had changed even more. It had no fur anymore. Its skin was this strange gray-blue color, and its body was swollen and unnatural, almost like some oversized hairless creature with a flattened trunk for a snout. It stayed pressed close to me wherever I moved, staring at me the whole time. And somehow, in the middle of all of that, his mom stayed calm and told me the man outside was only there to move furniture, and that I needed to sit down, relax, and have some tea. Then we turned a corner, and this woman came in dressed in white. She looked old-fashioned, almost delicate, with short curled hair and this pale yellow-blonde color to it. She was carrying a vintage mirror cabinet, the kind that opens into little compartments, and inside were pieces of gold jewelry laid out neatly, gleaming like they wanted to be noticed. My fiancé was mesmerized by it. The woman was speaking, but it was like hearing two voices from the same mouth. One voice was clear and pleasant, explaining the cabinet and the jewelry. The other was quieter, buried underneath, almost whispering in another layer of sound. I couldn't understand it, but I also couldn't stop listening. I sat straight up and told my fiancé that it felt like something had taken over my dream. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Not just a nightmare. More like something stepped in and started arranging things. What scared me even more was his reaction. He didn't laugh it off. He told me that when he used to live there, he would sometimes see an older woman in the house, and she reminded him of the woman from my dream. He said he'd also felt watched in that house before, and that there were times he believed there were spirits there. He even said parts of what I described sounded like another house he had lived in with his parents, where a man had died, and where he always felt like someone was sitting and observing him. The only history I really know about this place is what his dad has told me. It's a very old house, built long ago by a German family who apparently never finished it. There are stories about the property, stories about people dying, about strange gatherings, about the land holding on to things. And what unsettles me is that nobody in the family seems shocked by any of this. They all act like it's just part of the house. I still don't want to go into the woods at night. During the day, maybe, but after dark, absolutely not. Recently, while walking near the outer edge in daylight, we found a pile of deer bones and the remains of some smaller animal nearby. I know there are normal explanations for that. Coyotes, other wildlife, even people. I understand that. But with everything else that's happened here, it didn't feel easy to dismiss. Usually I question myself. I talk myself down. I tell myself I'm tired, anxious, imagining things. But this has gone beyond that for me. It feels like something is reaching, or calling, or trying to make itself look harmless when it isn't. And I don't know what it wants. I just know that whatever is happening here feels real to me. And more than anything, I want to understand it before it gets any closer. I still think about this trip sometimes, and even now, it gives me chills. My husband, Aaron, and I have always loved camping. We go all year round across Ontario, no matter what the weather's doing. Rain, cold, wind, even the first snow, it never really stops us. Usually those trips are the best kind of reset for us. We cook, hike, play cards, sit by the fire, and just disappear from the world for a while. A few years back, we decided to try a smaller campground several hours north of home over the long weekend in early September. We'd learned that if you stay a little past the holiday itself, the place usually empties out fast once families head back for work and school. Sure enough, when we arrived, it was beautiful and almost deserted. There were only a few other campers scattered around. The first night, the weather turned ugly. It rained hard all night, and by the next morning, we watched the last few campers pack up and leave. After that, it was just us. Completely alone. At first, that felt kind of perfect. For the next couple of days, everything was normal. We wandered the trails, made really good food, played board games under the canopy, and enjoyed how quiet everything was. But on what ended up being our last night there, the rain came back, heavier than before. We stayed close to the site and turned in early. Before bed, we cleaned everything up properly, packed away the dishes, stored the food, all of it. Nothing was left out. By the time we zipped ourselves into the tent, thunder was cracking right overhead, and lightning was flashing so bright it lit the whole campsite through the fabric. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. The thunder had started to fade, but the lightning was still intense. Every flash lit up the tent walls so clearly that I could make out the trees, the picnic table, the edges of the site outside us. I remember lying there, half awake, watching the shadows appear and vanish. Aaron was asleep beside me, completely calm, like none of it was bothering him. And then that feeling hit me. It was this sudden, overwhelming dread. Not nervousness, not simple fear. It felt like every instinct in my body was screaming that something was wrong. I tried to move, and I couldn't. I was frozen there, staring at the tent wall, heart pounding. Then I saw movement outside. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but every time the lightning flashed, it was there again. A figure. Tall. Moving on two legs. Too tall, honestly, and wrong somehow. The shape looked almost human, but not quite. The head seemed too large, the posture too strange. I just lay there, helpless, watching it circle closer and closer to the tent door. Then it came toward us. What terrified me most was that it didn't seem to open the tent. It just came through. That's the last thing I remember before everything went black. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and Aaron was outside making breakfast like it was any other day. I was completely shaken. I told him what happened, and he brushed it off at first. He said it was probably a nightmare, maybe sleep paralysis. And to be fair, I have had sleep paralysis before, so I tried to convince myself that was all it was. But this felt different. Far more vivid. Far more real. I couldn't shake the feeling at all, and eventually he agreed we should pack up and leave that day. Months later, I brought it up again. That's when he admitted he hadn't told me the truth that morning. He said he had also woken up that same night and seen a figure moving around outside the tent. He'd thought he must have been dreaming too, so he kept it to himself because he didn't want to scare me. But when I told him I'd seen it too, it rattled him. We never checked for footprints or anything like that. With all the rain, I doubt we would have found much anyway. Later on, one of Aaron's relatives recommended another northern campground to us, near an old, abandoned settlement. He and his family had just gone and thought we'd love it. While he was talking about it, his wife overheard and joined in. She said the place was beautiful, but from the moment they drove in, she felt like something was wrong. She couldn't explain it well, just that she felt uneasy the entire time and never wanted to go back. That stayed with me, but we went anyway. The campground had this eerie history to it. Long before settlers arrived, the land had belonged to indigenous communities. Then logging came in, a rail line was built, and for a while there had been a real town there. By the late 20th century, the railway was gone and most of the place had been left behind. To reach the campground, you had to drive through what was left of that old settlement first. A few homes were still standing, but most of it felt abandoned, like a place time had stepped away from. We arrived after dark over Thanksgiving weekend in October, after getting a little lost on the way. I will never forget that drive. The road was pitch black, and then when we finally reached our site, there was this enormous full moon hanging over the lake. It was so bright it almost didn't look real. The campground itself was quiet, sparse, maybe one or two other campers, and they were nowhere near us. Our site was right on the water, which Aaron loved because he's happiest with a fishing rod in his hand. One morning, he came back from fishing carrying an old cast-iron pot he'd found near the shoreline. Looking back, we probably should have left it where it was, but at the time it just felt like an odd little relic from the old town, so he brought it back to camp. Later that day, we both took a nap. I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the tent. I looked over and saw Aaron wasn't beside me, so I assumed he'd gotten up already. Then I heard him yelling. Not angry exactly, more startled, alarmed. He kept saying things like, "Hey buddy, what are you doing?" and "This is our campsite, you can't be here." I sat up, instantly tense, trying to understand what was happening. He kept calling out, asking who the person was and why they were there. Then after a few minutes, he came into the tent looking completely shaken and told me a man had wandered onto our site. He said the man was dressed strangely for the weather, no proper coat, no boots, even though it was freezing cold and had already been snowing off and on that weekend. According to Aaron, the man didn't respond to him at all. He just walked straight toward the water and stepped in, like he was searching for something. Aaron kept talking to him, trying to get his attention, but the man acted like he wasn't even there. Then the man turned and walked away. Aaron told me he was going to follow at a distance, just to make sure it wasn't some lost camper who needed help. He was gone maybe 10 minutes, maybe a little more. When he came back, he looked pale. He said he couldn't find anyone. There were a few sites behind ours, but they were empty. No cars, no voices, no sign that anyone had come through. Just nothing. We both stood there trying to make sense of it, and neither of us could. To this day, I don't know what we experienced on those trips. Maybe there's a logical explanation. Maybe fear, weather, isolation, old places, and darkness can do strange things to the mind. But I also can't ignore the fact that both of us saw things, separately, without knowing the other had seen them too. And with that second campground especially, with all that history sitting quietly under the surface, part of me still wonders whether we crossed paths with something that never really left. Honestly, I'm not sure which possibility is more unsettling. I want to tell you about something that's been weighing on me for a while, because honestly, I still don't know what to make of it. I'm 22, and I live with my fiancé Ryan in a tiny countryside town in Ireland. We moved into this old house in early autumn last year, and from the moment we settled in, things just started to feel off. Not all at once, not in some dramatic movie kind of way, but in little unsettling moments that slowly built into something harder to ignore. The house itself is very old, built sometime in the 1800s, and it's protected because of its history, so a lot of the original front windows and stonework are still there. It has 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, and this heavy, still feeling that's hard to explain unless you've been in a place like that. I never learned much for certain about its past, but people around town have said it may once have belonged to someone who worked with the dead, and that coffins were supposedly kept there. I've never been able to prove that, so I try not to lean too much on rumors. Still, once you're living there and strange things start happening, those stories do echo in your mind a bit louder. At the beginning, it was just me and Ryan in the house. We hadn't adopted our cats yet. One evening, maybe only a few weeks after moving in, I was home alone while he was out training. I was sitting on the sofa in the living room, half watching television, half winding down from the day. The way the house is laid out, the living room opens straight into the hallway, and from there you can see the stairs and the doors leading off to the kitchen and bathroom. We usually leave that door open because it's easier. It was dark outside by then, and I'm one of those people who hates wasting electricity, so the hallway light was off. I remember glancing toward the doorway because I caught movement in the corner of my eye. When I turned properly, I saw what looked like the outline of a head just barely leaning into view from the hallway, like someone was peeking in at me. What chilled me was the height of it. It was far too high up to make sense, higher than where anyone's head should have been. I just stared for a second because my brain genuinely couldn't catch up with what I was seeing. Then I looked away, almost instinctively, like if I broke eye contact it might stop being real. When I looked back, it was gone. I can still remember the cold rush that went through me. I felt completely stuck, like I couldn't even trust myself enough to move. I stayed right where I was until Ryan got home. When I told him, he tried to reassure me and said I was probably just spooked from being alone in an unfamiliar old house. And maybe that would have made sense if it had stopped there. But it didn't. After that, things seemed to get stranger. Lights would suddenly stop working, and when we checked the breaker, it had been flipped off. Doors would move on their own, especially our bedroom door late at night. We'd hear sudden thuds from downstairs, the kind that make you freeze and listen. More than once, I heard what sounded exactly like footsteps coming up the stairs, then along the hallway, and stopping right outside our bedroom door. Those were the moments that really got to me. That feeling of something coming closer, then just waiting outside. At first, I kept trying to explain it all away. Old house noises, bad wiring, drafts, floorboards settling. I wanted there to be a reasonable answer so badly. But then our cats came into the picture, and that changed things for me a little. These days, I feel watched in that house far more often than I'd like to admit. Not every second, not constantly, but enough that it sits in the back of my mind even when nothing is happening. That's the hardest part, really, the not knowing. I don't know whether this is all a chain of strange coincidences, whether there's some explanation we haven't found yet, or whether there's truly something in that house that doesn't want to be ignored. And I'll be honest with you, That uncertainty is what scares me most. Because if there is something there, I have no idea whether it means harm or whether it's simply there with us. I'm also afraid of doing the wrong thing, of reaching out, acknowledging it, or somehow making whatever this is feel more welcome in our lives. So that's where I'm at. I'm trying to stay rational, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't frightened. And more than anything, I just want to understand what's happening in that house. I've had things happen that my rational, science-minded brain still can't neatly explain. And honestly, that's part of why I'm sharing this with you. I'm someone who usually looks for evidence, patterns, and practical answers. But some experiences have stayed with me for years, and they don't fit cleanly into anything I can reason away. It started when I was about 11. I had this unbelievably vivid dream where I was walking through a beautiful, almost glowing garden. I came to this greenhouse, stepped inside, and there was George Harrison. We sat together for a while and talked. I don't remember every word now, but I remember the feeling. It was gentle, comforting. I was telling him about the hard things going on at home, and before I left, he looked at me, told me everything was going to be all right, and gave me a hug. I woke up feeling strangely comforted and just carried on, thinking it was simply a lovely dream. Then years later, long after I'd forgotten about it, I came across a photo of a garden that stopped me cold. It was the exact garden from that dream. Same feeling, same layout, same details. I looked into it more and realized it was the garden at Friar Park, George Harrison's estate. And the strange part is, as a kid, I had absolutely no reason to know that place even existed. But somehow, in that dream, I had been there. Another moment that still shakes me happened when I was home from college, spending time with friends. Right before I left, I had this sudden, completely out of nowhere urge to say something odd to one of my closest friends, whom I'll call Allie. I told her, "I never want to get a phone call about you dying." It was such a weird thing to say, so unlike me, and she just laughed it off. She told me not to worry, that nothing like that was going to happen. About 6 months later, I was at work and randomly brought up Allie's name to a coworker. There was no reason for it. It just came out. Less than 10 minutes later, my then fiancé, Martin, called me and told me she had died. I still remember the shock of that moment. It felt like the ground disappeared underneath me. Martin and I eventually broke up because of his addiction. It wasn't angry or cruel. I still cared about him deeply, but I couldn't stand by and watch him slowly destroy himself. We went our separate ways, and life kept moving. Then, in December 2022, he passed away from an overdose. The summer before he died, one of his best friends, Tyler, who had died years earlier, showed up in a dream. The whole thing had this heavy, unsettling feeling, like he was trying to warn me about something I couldn't yet see. After that dream, I started noticing reminders of him everywhere. Songs, old photos, certain clothes, random videos. Things tied to him kept appearing in my life in ways that felt too pointed to ignore. Then after Martin died, all of it stopped almost instantly. And it isn't only dreams. After my grandmother died, I was in that half-awake, half-asleep space one night, and I heard her laugh. Clear as day. Not faint, not imagined in some vague way. It sounded real enough that it brought me to tears. So that's the pattern I keep coming back to. Dreams. That in-between state of sleep and waking. Sudden intuitions about death. Details that later turn out to be true, even when I had no obvious way of knowing them. I've had many more experiences than these, but these are the ones that stay brightest in my mind. I still try to live my life logically, I still believe in questioning things, in being grounded, in not jumping to conclusions. But I can't pretend these moments haven't happened. They have. And they've left me with more questions than answers. I don't know what any of it means. I really don't. But I'd be grateful to hear whether you've ever gone through anything like this too. You know, I've had a few experiences over the years that still sit in the back of my mind because I've never quite known what to make of them. The first one happened when I was really little, maybe around 5. I was in my parents' bedroom in the middle of the day, just watching a Garfield cartoon on TV. I wasn't sleepy or anything, and everything felt completely normal at first. Then, out of nowhere, I got this strong feeling that something frightening was about to appear on the screen. It was so sudden that I turned away and shut my eyes. But here's the weird part. Even with my eyes closed, I somehow still felt like I could see what was happening on the TV. And I saw this huge purple octopus. I don't remember hearing anything that should have tipped me off. So when I looked back at the screen and saw that same octopus there, it really startled me. In the end, it actually wasn't scary at all, which almost made it stranger. I remember telling my mom about it, and I don't think she really believed me. It never happened again, not once. Another thing I remember from childhood is that up until I was maybe 7 or 8, I would sometimes hear voices very briefly. Sometimes it sounded like a man, sometimes a woman, but never anyone I recognized. Usually it was just one voice at a time, though once or twice it almost seemed like 2 people were speaking back and forth. What stood out was how real it sounded, like the voices were actually in the room and not just in my thoughts. The strangest part was that in the exact moment it happened, I felt like I understood what they were saying. But the second it stopped, it was like the meaning disappeared too, and I couldn't recall a single word. It would only last a split second, and I was usually alone when it happened. It hasn't happened since I was a kid, so I've always wondered whether it was just one of those odd things that can happen when you're young and your mind is still developing. There was also this other thing from when I was a kid that I didn't think much about until I got older. At night, I'd sometimes notice what looked like cat eyes in the reflection of windows. Usually this happened when lights were on inside, though I think I may have noticed it in daylight once or twice too. I never owned a cat, and sometimes I'd see them reflected in upstairs windows, which made even less sense. They always looked too close, almost warped somehow, not like they could belong to an actual animal outside. Back then, I mostly brushed it off and figured it was just the reflection catching in a strange way. But the reason it stayed with me is that I stopped seeing them as I got older. That made me look back on it differently. Maybe it really was just childhood imagination, or maybe my eyes and brain were interpreting things in a way they no longer do now. Then there's the most recent one, from maybe a few years ago. I was sitting in bed at night, looking out at the stars, when I noticed one of them moving. At first, I assumed it had to be a plane, but it didn't blink, and it looked exactly like all the other stars around it. It moved slowly and steadily in a straight line, and then it seemed to line up with another star and just disappear. Every night, the last walk with my dog happens pretty late, usually sometime between about midnight and 2:30 in the morning, depending on how the day has gone. It's always just me and my dog, Rusty, out on this completely quiet street, with maybe one car passing every now and then. This happened a couple of years ago. It was during one of those final walks, and I remember it being a little after 1:30 a.m. Rusty had just finished doing his business, and we turned around to head back home. That's when I suddenly got this powerful feeling that someone was watching us. You know that feeling that hits before you even understand why? It was exactly that. As we walked past a couple of parked cars on our side of the street, my view opened up toward the house across from ours. And that's when I saw him. There was this very tall figure just standing there, facing us, a few feet behind the neighbor's pickup truck. At first, I thought it might be the man who lived there, because he was tall too. But even then, something about it felt wrong. As we got closer, I could tell it wasn't him at all. This figure was taller, much thinner, almost unnaturally lean. Our neighbor was broad and solidly built. This was different. Then I noticed something that sent this cold jolt through me. There's a street light near our yard that lights up everything around it. Our driveway, the sidewalk, the neighbor's yard, even the front of their house. It all gets washed in that light. But this figure didn't. It wasn't lit at all. I'd seen people out walking late before, and at that spot on the street, nobody ever stayed in shadow. But this thing did. And the closer I got, the stranger it looked. It was almost like it wasn't just standing in darkness. It was pulling the light into itself. That's the only way I can describe it. It looked darker than any shadow around it, darker than it should have been. It never moved, not once. But somehow, the way it stood there made it obvious it was watching me. And the feeling I had only got stronger the closer I came. It felt threatening. Deeply threatening. Normally, I would have kept walking straight to our driveway before turning in, but that would have put me directly across the street from it. I couldn't do that. So instead, I cut up the next-door neighbor's driveway and crossed through our yard just to put more space between us. Even then, it still felt too close. I kept glancing back over my shoulder while I unlocked the front door, and the whole time it stayed exactly where it was, just watching. Once I got inside, I tried to tell myself it had to be some kind of trick of the light. I really wanted to believe that. But deep down, I didn't believe it. Not really. And ever since then, every single night when I take Rusty out for that last walk, I look at that exact same spot. Part of me keeps hoping I'll see it again, because maybe then I could force myself to get closer and prove there's some normal explanation. But it's never happened again. And honestly, after all this time, it's getting harder and harder to pretend it was nothing. I truly believe that something or someone was out there watching us that night. When I was around 9, I lived in a very remote part of Suriname. Most of the country felt wild and open, with one main city and then long stretches of countryside and rainforest. We were in one of those quiet places, the kind where you could stand outside and hear almost nothing except wind, insects, and your own thoughts. Our nearest neighbor was across from us, and after that, the next house was so far away it barely felt like a neighborhood at all. Our home sat right beside the rainforest, along a dirt road that didn't lead anywhere useful. There was no store, no school, no reason for strangers to pass by. Just trees, brush, red dirt, and the same familiar silence every day. We didn't have a TV, so my brothers, sisters, and I made our own fun. We read whatever books we could find, rode our bikes up and down the road, and played outside until the light started fading. That was just life for us. Quiet, predictable, almost sealed off from the rest of the world. I should probably mention something about myself because this part matters. When I was a child, strange things happened around me from time to time. Not constantly, but enough that I couldn't pretend it was my imagination. I'd feel my hair tugged when no one was near me. Sometimes I'd wake up with scratches on my legs. Once in a while, I'd hear whispering so close it felt like someone was standing right behind me. Even now, as an adult, rare things still happen, I never went looking for any of it. I just learned to live with it. But what happened that day felt different. I was outside watching our dogs messing around in the yard when I noticed a man jogging past our house. He was white, dressed in running clothes, maybe a pale shirt and shorts, moving at a steady pace down that dirt road. I had never seen him before. That alone was strange. Nobody used that road unless they lived there, and we all knew each other. My neighbors were Indian, older, quiet, and kept to themselves. There was no one else around. What struck me immediately was that the dogs didn't react. These were guard dogs. They barked at everything. A bird landing too hard on a branch could set them off. But this man passed right by, and they didn't make a sound. They didn't even seem to notice him. I asked my mother about him, and she looked confused. She said she hadn't seen anyone. I remember trying to explain it, telling her he had just run past the house, but she brushed it off because there was no one there by then. I let it go. Then a few days later, I saw him again. Same road. Same steady jog. Same silence. This time, without even thinking it through, I grabbed my bike and followed him. That part still unsettles me, even now. It wasn't curiosity, not really. I didn't feel brave or playful or even reckless. It was more like a pull. A quiet command in the back of my mind telling me to keep going. I didn't call for my mother. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, which was unusual for me. I just got on my bike and trailed behind him. I stayed maybe 10 or 12 feet back, and the whole time I heard nothing. That road was dry and rough. If someone ran on it, you'd hear the crunch of dirt and gravel under their feet. If I coasted too fast on my bike, I could hear my own tires grinding against the road. But from him, nothing. Not one footstep. Not one breath. Nothing. He never looked back at me either. He had to know I was there. I was right behind him, close enough that any normal person would have turned around at least once. But he didn't. He just kept moving forward, calm and steady, like I wasn't even worth acknowledging. Every sensible part of me should have turned around. I should have stopped right there and gone home. But I didn't. He ran straight off the road and into the grass. And even then, there was no sound. No swish of grass brushing against his legs, no crackle, no bending stems, barely any movement at all, as if the grass didn't know he was passing through it. That was the moment something inside me finally started to panic. I got off my bike and stood there staring. He was moving toward the trees, and I was just about to step forward and follow him into that field when, from my left side, I heard my mother's voice as clearly as I've ever heard anything in my life. "Maisie!" Loud, sharp, real. I turned immediately and answered, "What?" But there was no one there. No mother, no person, no movement behind me, just empty road and still air. I spun back around toward the trees. The man was gone, completely gone. There was nowhere he could have disappeared to that quickly. No path, no opening, no sound, no sign of anything moving ahead of me. 1 second he was there, and the next second I was alone. I felt this cold rush go through my whole body, like something deep inside me had finally woken up and realized I was in danger. I jumped back on my bike and rode home as fast as I could, barely breathing. When I got there, my mother was inside cooking. She had never left the house, and I never saw that man again. To this day, I do not believe he was human. I believe something lured me down that road. I believe I was being drawn away on purpose, almost like I'd fallen under a spell for those few minutes. And whatever called me back, whatever used my mother's voice to stop me from taking that next step, saved me. Years later, I spoke with a psychic medium who told me there was an older female spirit watching over me, some kind of guardian. I don't know what to make of that. I can't say for certain who or what protected me that day. Maybe it was a spirit. maybe it was something I'll never understand. All I know is this: something wanted me to keep following that runner into the trees, and something else made sure I didn't. And I have never stopped being grateful for that. You know, my parents sold my childhood home a few years ago and bought this older house that had originally been built by a husband and wife back in the late 1960s. As far as we know, that couple were the only people who had ever lived there before my parents. The wife passed away sometime in the 2010s, and her husband died in 2022. Not long after that, the house was sold to my parents. We really did not know much else about them. When we first got the place, it felt like stepping into a time capsule. So much of it still had that old 1970s look and charm. My parents love renovation projects, so they updated almost everything. Now it looks beautiful, fresh, and bright, but it still has this quiet personality from the original home that we never wanted to erase. Before we fully moved in, we brought our dog over a few times. Her name is Maisie, and she is fearless. Seriously, nothing rattles her. Loud storms, fireworks, strange noises, none of it bothers her. But one day, I was walking through the house with my brother and Maisie, just looking around because I had not really explored it yet. There is a finished basement, and connected to it is this unfinished storage area with an old bathroom tucked away in the back. The second we got near that space, Maisie completely changed. She started barking, whining, and refusing to go any farther. She would only wait on the stairs for us to come back up. She acted the exact same way around the old shed at the far end of the yard. At first, I laughed it off because dogs can be weird sometimes. But after a while, it did start to stick with me. At the time, I was still in school, so I spent a lot of hours sitting at the desk in the corner of my room. Over and over again, I would catch this faint smell drifting through the room, like an old floral perfume. It would come in so suddenly, almost like it had slipped in through a crack somewhere, and then vanish just as fast. It was never anything my mom or I owned, and it definitely was not the kind of scent either of us would wear. We both hate heavy floral perfumes. But the strange part is, it never felt unsettling. Every time I noticed it, I felt calm, safe even. Then today, my mom and I were talking with one of her friends, and somehow the conversation drifted into paranormal stories. I am really interested in that kind of thing, but my mom usually is not. She is more of a polite listener than a believer. But while we were talking, she brought up something she had never really made a big deal out of before. She said that one night she woke up and saw an elderly woman sitting at the edge of her bed. The woman had short white hair and was holding a small white dog in her lap. And what really stood out to me was that my mom said she did not feel afraid at all. Not even for a second. She just felt oddly at peace. When she said that, I immediately thought about the perfume because it sounded like the same kind of presence. Gentle, familiar somehow, not frightening. The next morning, my mom told my dad what she had seen. They knew the last name of the couple who had built the house, so they looked up their obituaries. They had never seen a photo of them before, but the very first picture my dad found showed the same older woman, with the same short white hair, holding the same little white dog my mom had described. I do not know if it was my sleep schedule or something deeper, but when I woke up this morning, I genuinely was not expecting the light. I still had the same thought in my head that I had fallen asleep with, and when I opened my eyes, it felt like time had skipped ahead without me, like whole hours had quietly disappeared. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just one of those ordinary feelings people have and brush off. But when I first woke up, I could not shake the sense that something had shifted. The energy in my room felt different. Not dramatic in a movie kind of way, just off, strange, unfamiliar. I remember looking around at my room, at the windows especially, like I was seeing them from a distance. I even pulled out my grimoire and started writing in it, which I have not done in a long while. I think part of me was trying to ground myself, to anchor back into something familiar. When I thought about the night before, I started piecing together a few possible reasons, though none of them came with clear answers. It is a little embarrassing to admit, but I have been playing this video game with these stylized, alluring versions of the 7 deadly sins. I had been saying some of their names out loud without really thinking much of it. Mostly Mamiel, because that character stands out to me the most, but also the others too, like Lucien. I had also been thinking a lot about the game's version of hell, which feels more symbolic and layered than the terrifying version religion often paints. I tend to rationalize everything. Even when something unsettles me, like demons, spirits, or anything in that realm, I usually keep it at arm's length by thinking it through. That habit has protected me in a lot of ways. And to be honest, aside from a few unsettling experiences when I was younger, I have mostly stayed away from anything that felt too dark for the past few years. What made it stranger was the dream, or at least the fragments of it I could remember. I usually do not remember my dreams clearly, but this one stayed with me in pieces. I remember being in a cathedral, dressed as an altar girl, standing beside a close friend. Then there was a man, someone powerful, offering me weed. I still do not want to say who he reminded me of, but the feeling of it lingers. After that, I remember walking out from a stone tower passage, and a priest shutting these heavy wooden doors beside me. The night before, I had also been writing about time loops and immortality. I was deep in those thoughts, really wandering through them, though that is not unusual for me. I have always been drawn to ideas like that. What gives me pause is my own history. Years ago, I learned the hard way what obsession with dark or demonic themes can do to my mind. I made a promise to myself that I would not let myself drift too far into those things again. Back in high school, I had a period where I got intensely fixated on incubi and all of that. It left a mark on me. So this morning, sitting there in bed, I started wondering whether constantly speaking certain names, thinking certain thoughts, and turning things over in my mind could somehow make them feel more real. I have never felt particularly talented at manifestation. I mean, I have tried for years with very little to show for it. So part of me keeps asking, why would anything suddenly start working now? And yet, when I woke up, I truly felt a shift. All I know is that I have not felt the energy around me change that strongly in a very long time. And maybe it does not have to mean something frightening. Maybe it is not a warning at all. Maybe it is a nudge, a sign that some part of me is waking back up. Not just toward life, but toward the more intuitive, witchy part of myself that I have let go quiet for too long. I still remember the first time I saw it. I had just stepped out of my room, heading to the bathroom like it was any other normal moment. The stairs leading up to the top floor are right there the second you walk out, so they're hard to miss. And as I was passing by, I caught sight of something moving down the stairs. At first, I just froze. It froze too. For maybe 3 seconds, we just looked at each other. I kept walking, almost like my mind refused to process what I'd just seen. But a few steps later, it hit me. I really had seen something. So I turned back and looked at the stairs again. Nothing. It had been near the very top. All I really caught was its body, completely dark, like a black shape against the stairway. And when I tried to look again, it was gone. After that, I asked my cousins if they'd ever seen anything strange in the house. They told me, not a demon, but a ghost. The thing is, I wasn't really asking about ghosts, because I already believed there were spirits in the house. So hearing that only made me feel more certain that what I saw was something darker. Our house has a long history. It's been standing since the 1970s, and it was remodeled sometime in the 1980s. Since then, so many of my relatives have lived here. My grandparents, my uncle and aunt, my cousins, all of us passing through the same rooms, the same halls, the same heavy feeling in the air. My aunt used to talk about that feeling a lot. She lives overseas now, but ever since I was younger, she said the house carries this energy that drains people. She's always been sensitive to things most people would brush off. She once tried to explain that she would sometimes leave her body in her sleep and wander without meaning to. I never knew exactly what to call that, but she believed it was real, and honestly, the older I get, the harder it is to dismiss what she said. She always believed the house held on to pain. Not just sadness, but anger too. Tension, frustration. Like the walls soaked it all in over the years and never let it go. And when you grow up hearing that, and then you start feeling it for yourself, it gets under your skin. Sometimes I catch myself wondering whether everyone who stays here ends up carrying that weight. Whether the house presses down on people until they can't really move forward. Maybe doomed is too strong a word, but it does feel like no one here has ever really had the chance to thrive. Maybe it's something spiritual. Maybe it's years of emotional wounds and untreated struggles piling up. Maybe it's both. I honestly don't know. What really scares me is that I'm not the only one who's seen something. My brother had his own encounter too. He said he saw the same figure in the bathroom. Again, completely black. That shook me because my cousins had already told me they'd felt watched there before, especially from the bathroom on the second floor. Like something was standing there, just staring. And then there are the smaller things, the ones that start out easy to dismiss until they happen too often. My brother was making noodles one night and swore he only turned on one burner on the stove. Just one. But when he came back, there were two burners on. He also noticed a wooden-handled fork sitting near the flame, even though he hadn't left it there. That kind of thing stays with you. It makes you replay every little detail, asking yourself whether you made a mistake or whether something else was there with you. So that's where I am now. I'm worried. I don't know exactly what this thing is, and I don't want to jump straight to calling it a demon, even though that's where my mind keeps going. I've heard people say demons do far worse, that they hurt people, disturb homes, and make their presence known in terrifying ways. Whatever this is, it does seem to disturb things, but in quieter ways, subtle enough that part of you still questions yourself. And maybe that's what unsettles me most. Not just what I saw, but how impossible it feels to explain it away. So this morning I got up at around 8:30, but I was still completely drained because I'd stayed up way too late the night before. I made myself a cup of tea and tried to ease into the day, but I could barely keep my eyes open. My husband and our dog were still asleep, and the whole house was so quiet that I figured I'd just lie back down for a little while. I set a couple of alarms, thinking I'd only rest for a few minutes before properly starting my day. And then, I slipped into one of the strangest dreams I've ever had. In the dream, I thought I had woken up in my bed, but right away something looked wrong. My bedside table wasn't the way it normally is at all. Instead of the usual stuff, it was covered with all these random craft things: colored pens, sketch pads, scissors, and this odd little metal tool that looked part compass, part ruler. I remember staring at it and thinking, this has to be a dream. None of this belongs here. But then I reached out and touched it, and that's what really got me. It felt completely real. The cool metal, the weight of it, the texture, all of it felt exactly the way it would in real life. I even remember telling myself, I need to remember this when I wake up. Then I really did wake up, but I was still exhausted, so I closed my eyes again. And somehow, I went straight back into the exact same dream. Same room, same bed, same strange feeling. But this time my husband was there, awake, acting totally normal. He was teasing me, being playful, leaning over me, kissing me, and it all felt so physically real that I didn't question it at first. Then I woke up again for real, opened my eyes, and just lay there for a second thinking, wait, that wasn't actually him? But I was still so sleepy that I drifted off again. And somehow, the dream picked up again, right where it had left off. Only this time, everything shifted. The energy changed. What had felt familiar suddenly felt wrong. It no longer felt like my husband at all. I started seeing this unsettling figure, something dark and distorted, almost human but not quite, and then mostly just shadows. At the same time, I could still feel this weight pressing on me, like someone was physically there. That was the moment it turned terrifying, because I realized I couldn't move. My whole body felt frozen. My eyes were so heavy, and I was fighting so hard to open them. I could actually feel my eyes trying to move underneath my eyelids, like I was forcing myself awake and getting nowhere. I started to panic a little, but I also knew enough to realize what might be happening, so I tried to stay calm. I focused on my breathing and kept telling myself, wake up, just wake up. Eventually, I snapped out of it. What still freaks me out most is how vivid all of it felt. The objects on the nightstand, the physical touch, the pressure, every part of it felt far too real to be just an ordinary dream. And the repeated false waking, like I kept surfacing only to find myself still inside it, made the whole thing even more unsettling. Honestly, the worst part was that shift, when I realized the person I thought was my husband wasn't him at all. That change from comforting to terrifying happened so fast, and it stayed with me long after I was fully awake. I really think the alarms, the broken sleep, and drifting in and out probably messed with my sleep cycle and dropped me right into something intense. But still, I can't stop thinking about how real it all felt. I want to tell you about the night my granddad Walter passed away, because I still have not been able to fully explain what I felt, and maybe saying it out loud like this will help. For a little background, I am 23, and ever since I was little, I have believed there are things in this world we cannot easily explain. I grew up in a house where strange things happened all the time, especially when I was younger. So for me, the paranormal has never felt impossible. It has always felt real. About a year before he died, my granddad was diagnosed with stage 4 leukemia. He fought hard, truly hard. He went through every treatment he could, held on as long as he could, and kept pushing for more time with us. My family knew the day would come eventually, so we did our best to be there for him as much as possible. When the treatment stopped helping, he was placed on hospice care at my aunt's house. I started taking time off work so I could spend more time there. In his final days, he declined quickly. About 3 days before he passed, he was no longer conscious, and we knew the end was close. On the day he died, I got word that he might only have a few hours left, so I rushed over. I spent most of the afternoon sitting quietly with family, along with the hospice nurse, just waiting. That kind of waiting feels endless. Nobody says much. You just listen to every breath and watch every small change. Sometime around early evening, maybe a little after 5, a close family friend arrived to say goodbye. She had not been able to visit much, so it meant a lot that she came. After a while, she stepped outside with my aunt, and the two of them sat on the porch, talking softly, having a drink and a smoke. Not long after they went outside, I started feeling strange. At first, it was just a headache. Then I got suddenly hot, the kind of heat that makes your skin feel wrong, almost feverish. I remember thinking maybe I was coming down with something. I got up, poured myself some water, and sat back down. But instead of passing, the feeling got worse. The room started to feel heavy. That is the only word that fits. Heavy. Thick. Like the air had changed. My granddad was already making those rattling breaths people talk about at the end. And sitting there, I felt this pressure building in my head and chest. It was so intense that I had to leave the room. I went outside and sat with my aunt and her friend on the porch. The second I stepped out, I started feeling better. Not a little better either. Almost immediate relief. The headache eased, the heat faded, and that crushing heaviness lifted. I told my aunt, "You should probably go back in. He's doing the death rattle." She went inside, and I stayed out there a little longer, trying to settle myself. Once I felt mostly normal again, aside from a faint leftover headache, I went back into the house. And the moment I crossed the doorway, it all hit me again. Full force. Instantly. The headache, the heat, the heaviness, all of it came rushing back. But this time, the whole house felt different. Darker somehow. Off. Not visually dark exactly, just spiritually dark, if that makes sense. The energy in the room had changed. It felt tense and charged, like everything around us knew something sacred and final was happening. One of my aunts had gone out to pick up food earlier, and my dad called her and told her to get back to the house right away. We all knew it was happening then. My dad sent me back outside so I could watch for her and make sure she came in quickly. So I went back out. And again, being outside made me feel normal. I stood there waiting for her car, and while I waited, the strange symptoms faded almost completely. A few minutes later, she finally pulled up. She was moving slowly at first, not realizing how urgent it was, and I hurried her toward the door. But this time, when I went back inside with her, I felt nothing. No headache. No heat. No heaviness. Just stillness. Then my family told me he had taken his last breath right as her car pulled into the driveway. That is the part I cannot stop thinking about. I do not know exactly what happened in that house that night. I cannot prove it was something paranormal, and maybe some people would say it was stress, grief, or my body reacting to the moment. Maybe part of it was. But deep down, it felt like I was sensing something building, something crossing over, something gathering in the room before he let go. And then, the instant he was gone, it was gone too. That is what stays with me. Not just that he died, but that the feeling disappeared the moment he did. Like whatever filled that room left with him.